A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Cauliflower Campbell. Prologue. The Dream. Darkness. That was all she could see at first. The kind of thick, endless dark that pressed against her skin and stole the air from her lungs. Sydney's pulse drummed so violently she could feel it in her throat, in her wrists, in the tips of her fingers. She was running, bare feet slapping against damp earth, branches scratching at her arms like skeletal fingers. She didn't know from what or why, but instinct told her it was something terrible, something hungry, something that would not stop until it consumed her. Every sound was amplified, the crunch of leaves, the frantic rhythm of her breaths, the shrill echo of someone, snapping branches in pursuit. Her lungs burned, her legs shook, yet she couldn't stop. She looked over her shoulder. Nothing. No shadow, no beast, no figure, only blackness swallowing the forest whole. But dread gripped her tighter than any hand could. It whispered from somewhere deep inside. It's here. It's watching. And it wants you. The ground suddenly tilted beneath her. Her foot slid, her ankle twisted, and she stumbled forward with a cry. She caught herself just before her knees hit the soil, panting so hard her chest ached. When her gaze lifted again, the forest was gone. She was standing at the edge of a cliff. The transformation was so abrupt it stole her breath. A vast emptiness yawned below, jagged stone and shadows that seemed to stretch for eternity. The air was sharper here, colder, and the wind howled like a living thing, whipping her hair across her face in cruel lashes. The drop promised only one thing, death. No, she whispered, staggering backward from the ledge. But she froze. They were there. Her family. Her father, sharp in his tailored suit as always, the cut of his Italian wool blazer perfect even in this impossible place. Her mother, pristine in an ivory silk dress that shimmered faintly in the darkness. Her diamond necklace gleaming like ice around her neck. And Kylie, her younger sister, barely 18, her hair tied neatly with a velvet ribbon, her dress a powder blue confection that looked plucked from the window of a Parisian boutique. They stood side by side, their faces carved from stone, cold, unyielding, merciless, not smiling, not reaching out, not pulling her back from the edge. They looked at her as though she were nothing, a stranger, a mistake. Someone unworthy of the family name. Her lips trembled. Mom? Sydney's voice cracked, fragile. Dad? Kylie? No one answered. Her father's stare hardened, the kind he wore during business meetings in their marble-lined dining hall when the servants slipped in with silver trays of wine and he dismissed them with a flick of his hand. His mouth was a flat line, his jaw tense with silent judgment. Her mother tilted her head ever so slightly, her lips pressed into a thin, elegant sneer, the kind she reserved for socialites who wore knockoff couture and thought no one noticed. And Kylie, sweet, innocent Kylie, stepped forward. Sydney's breath caught. Her sister's wide eyes gleamed not with love, but with something crueler, sharper, something that didn't belong in the girl she remembered reading bedtime stories to. The ribbon in her hair fluttered, her heels clicking softly against the stone ground as she drew closer. Kylie? Sydney begged. Her little sister leaned close, her lips moving. Sydney strained to hear, desperate, but the wind swallowed the words. They came like broken whispers, sharp and venomous, slipping through the air in pieces she couldn't piece together. Her heart pounded. What are you saying? Please, Kylie, don't. Then Kylie's hand lifted and shoved. No, Sydney screamed. Her body pitched backward, the cliff vanishing beneath her heels. The world tilted into a blur of jagged sky and stone. The wind roared in her ears as she fell, her stomach plummeting, her throat burning as terror clawed its way out in a scream. Her arms flailed, reaching for anything, anyone. But there was nothing. No ground, no mercy, no family, only the drop, and then, nothing. Her eyes flew open. Sydney sat bolt upright in her bed, sheets tangled around her legs, her body drenched in cold sweat. Her breaths came ragged, shallow, as though she had truly been falling, as though the air had been ripped from her lungs and never returned. Her heart pounded so violently it hurt, and for a moment the dream still clung to her skin like frost. The shadows of it lived in her room, the towering canopy bed, the velvet curtains drawn tight to block the moonlight, the faint perfume of roses drifting from the crystal vase on her nightstand. She could still feel the cliff's air on her cheeks, could still see her family's merciless eyes staring back at her. She could still feel Kylie's hand pressing against her shoulder. "No," she whispered into the silence, clutching the sheets with trembling fingers. "It was just a dream. Just a dream." But the dread didn't leave, because deep down Sydney knew dreams didn't always lie. Sometimes they warned, and as the night pressed in around her, the quiet hum of the mansion filling her ears, the tick of the French clock on the mantel, the faint drip of the indoor fountain down the hall, Sydney lay awake, staring at the ceiling gilded in gold leaf. Her family, with all their wealth, their power, their tailored suits and silk gowns, lived lives built on luxury and secrets. They had everything: Rolls-Royces in the garage, yachts in Monaco, a private collection of Cartier jewels locked away in velvet-lined safes. But in that dream, in those merciless eyes, Sydney had seen something money couldn't hide. And she couldn't shake the feeling that soon, very soon, her dream would no longer belong only to the night. It would bleed into reality, and when it did, her life, her family, and every golden luxury she thought untouchable would never be the same. The wedding that ended in ashes, the scent of roses should have made Sydney Smith feel cherished. Thousands of them, imported white gardenias and red roses flown in from Italy, lined the grand hall in crystal vases engraved with the Darkmoor crest. Their perfume curled through the air, blending with expensive colognes and the faint tang of champagne poured into tall, slim flutes carried by uniformed servers. The laughter, the music, the fluttering of silk gowns and tuxedos, all should have made her feel like a bride stepping into the happiest day of her life. But instead, every note of the violin grated against her chest, every flicker of candlelight burned her eyes. She stood before 1,000 witnesses, pack members, her family, powerful allies, business partners, all gathered to celebrate what should have been her union. The entire ballroom of Darkmoor Estate shimmered under golden light, crystal chandeliers casting fractured rainbows across polished marble floors. The women glittered in gowns from Dior and Elie Saab, diamonds on their throats catching every flicker of light, while the men moved in Armani tuxedos, shoes polished to mirrors. It was a portrait of wealth, dominance, and power. Yet she had never felt more alone. Her fingers trembled against the folds of her gown as she smoothed it down, trying to steady herself. The gown itself was exquisite. Custom Dior, ivory silk with hand-stitched lace trailing down her sleeves, a skirt layered with organza that billowed softly with every nervous shift. She wanted to smile, to look radiant like brides were supposed to, but there was a shadow clinging to her heart. She couldn't shake the dream she had had the night before. It lingered like smoke, refusing to fade no matter how she told herself it was just her nerves. She had seen herself at the edge of a cliff, her family in front of her, their faces hard and merciless. She had seen Kylie, sweet Kylie, step forward, lips moving with words Sydney couldn't hear, before pushing her into the abyss. She had woken with a scream, drenched in sweat, whispering into the silence. It was only a dream. It meant nothing. Because her family had always loved her, hadn't they? Now, standing in the grand ballroom of Darkmoor Estate, beneath chandeliers worth more than most families' homes, she tried to bury that dread. This was supposed to be her moment, the moment she had been raised for. Her marriage wasn't one born purely of romance, though she had clung to the idea of love for years. It had been arranged by the Council of Lichen Ridge only 2 weeks ago, a strategic binding of 2 powerful pacts. She, Sydney Smith, eldest daughter of the Silverfangs, was chosen to marry Elias Darkmoor, heir to the Darkmoor fortune and title. With their union, they'll lead Silverfang, with Elias as Alpha and she as Luna. But it wasn't duty alone that steadied her feet at the altar. Sydney had known Elias for years. She had loved him for years. He had been her quiet promise, her future. She had believed, truly believed, that this union was more than politics, that it was love, too. Her heart pounded with nervous anticipation as she stared at him across the altar. This was the man she was supposed to bind herself to, the man meant to protect her, the man meant to love her. Elias wasn't just an alpha, he was the alpha. Dominant, powerful, heir to one of the most feared and respected packs in the region. When he walked into a room, people lowered their heads without question. His presence alone was intoxicating. Broad shoulders encased in a Tom Ford tuxedo, his tie knotted with precision, his dark hair combed back to perfection. Today, she had thought, he would lower his heart to her. But then, his phone rang. The sound was sharp, slicing through the ceremonial music like a blade. A trivial thing. Ordinary. But when Elias glanced at the screen, Sydney saw the shift. His jaw tightened, his brows pulled together, and when he returned his gaze to her, his eyes weren't soft or steady. They burned. Fury, restrained but vicious, simmered beneath them. His hand shook faintly as he adjusted his tie, fingers twitching against the silk. And in that moment, though she didn't yet understand why, Sydney knew something was wrong. The priest began. The ceremony unfolded in rhythm, the vows, the blessings, the carefully rehearsed words that had been practiced in private chambers. But Elias's silence was heavy, oppressive, suffocating. When his turn came, when he was asked to say the words that should have bound them, his voice cut like steel through the expectant hush. "I, Elias Darkmoor," he began, and Sydney's breath caught in her throat. "Reject Sydney Smith of the Silverfang pack, because she is not the true heir of Silverfang." The words detonated. Gasps erupted through the crowd. A wave of whispers tore through the hall like wildfire, burning her alive with every passing second. The priest froze mid-sentence, eyes wide with horror. The music screeched to a halt. Even the candles seemed to shiver, their flames bending in the draft of her humiliation. Sydney's chest splintered. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His words echoed, taunting, merciless, not a true Silverfang. What did he mean by that? Her veil slipped from her head, drifting down like ash, landing at her feet in a pile of lace and broken dreams. She stared at him, desperately searching his face for hesitation, for mercy, for anything that might undo the cruelty. But Elias's eyes were shards of ice. There was no love, no conflict, no regret, only finality. And then, she saw her, Kylie. Her sister emerged from the shadows, stepping into the golden light of the chandeliers. She wore a gown almost identical to Sydney's, white and flowing, her hair perfectly curled by the same Parisian stylist. Her beauty was undeniable. She looked every inch the Silverfang princess. But it wasn't her beauty that cut Sydney, it was the smirk. Small, sharp, poisonous, enough to rip Sydney's heart from her chest. Kylie had told her earlier to go ahead, that she would catch up, that she would stand at her side when it mattered most. Sydney had waited, believing her, trusting her. Kylie was her only sister. They had shared childhood secrets, whispered in the dark. They had fought and made up with hugs, sworn loyalty to each other when no one else would understand. But when Elias reached for Kylie's hand, Sydney felt the world collapse inside her. Her chest burned. She had heard rumors, whispers she had dismissed as cruelty from jealous tongues. She had seen fleeting glances between them, moments she refused to interpret as betrayal. Because Kylie would never. She had convinced herself that Elias would never, but now, before the entire world, the truth stood naked. They had always been together. They had always betrayed her, and Elias's words made sense now. Not a true Silverfang. Memories struck her like lightning. The fights with Kylie, the taunts about Sydney not really belonging, not being the true heir. The way their mother always hushed it, brushed it aside, silenced them before Sydney could demand answers. And now, the truth slammed into her chest with unforgiving clarity. She wasn't their daughter. Her knees buckled. She turned to her parents, clinging to some shred of hope, some explanation that would make this nightmare unravel. But her mother's eyes were cold, unreadable. Her father's jaw was firm, unmoving. No sympathy, no concern, no love. They had abandoned her, too. Her dream from last night surged back in vivid detail. Her family at the cliff. Kylie stepping forward. The push. The fall. It hadn't been meaningless. It had been a warning. And now it was her reality. The walls of the hall seemed to close in. The whispers rose, louder, harsher. Her lungs burned as she tried to draw air, but each breath came sharp and shallow. She couldn't stay. Not 1 second longer. Her heels stumbled against the aisle as she turned and ran. Through the doors, past the gaping crowd, past the laughter that twisted into jeers mocking her pain. She fled into the night, her gown tangling around her legs, her sobs breaking loose, raw and ragged. The woods swallowed her whole. Branches clawed at her Dior gown, tearing the silk. Stones sliced her bare feet, where her Louboutin heels had been lost in the chaos. Her tears blurred everything into streaks of shadow and silver. Wolves howled in the distance, their cries splitting the night. She didn't care if they found her. She didn't care if she never returned. She ran until her lungs burned, until her muscles screamed, until the ground tilted beneath her. And too late, she realized she had reached the cliff's edge. The soil crumbled under her heel. She pitched forward, a scream tearing from her throat as the sky spun and the abyss yawned open to swallow her. But something caught her. A grip, powerful, unyielding. Her wrist locked in massive jaws. Her heart seized, certain this was her end, that a beast had dragged her to finish what Elias had started. But when she looked, she froze. The wolf was massive, larger than anything she had ever imagined. Its fur was white, gleaming even in the dim light, as if sculpted from snow and fire. Its eyes, those eyes, burned into her soul. Not with hunger, not with malice, with something else, something ancient, something terrifyingly possessive. He pulled her back, steadying her trembling form with shocking gentleness. She collapsed onto the grass, her body shaking, sobs racking her chest, and the wolf didn't leave. He pressed against her, lowering his massive frame beside her, shielding her from the cold, from the shadows, from everything that threatened to devour her. His warmth seeped into her bones, chasing away the chill of betrayal. Her lips trembled as she gasped, Why? Why are you here?" The wolf didn't answer with sound. His muzzle brushed against her hand, firm and deliberate, pressing into her trembling skin. And then, a voice, not out loud but inside her mind, deep, commanding, unshakable, mine. Her eyes widened, her breath caught. She yanked her hand back, heart thundering, but the wolf only pressed closer, his growl low and satisfied. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm going crazy, I'm losing my mind." But the wolf's eyes blazed hotter, fiercer, his silent claim wrapping around her like chains she could never break. Mine. Her pulse raced. Was she terrified? Was she safe? Was she broken? Whole? Damned? Chosen? And as the forest sank into silence, Sydney Smith realized the truth. Her nightmare wasn't ending. It was only just beginning. Chapter 1. The Wolf's Rescue. The night was a blur of trees and shadows, her screams lost to the endless stretch of the forest. Sydney Smith thought this was the end. Her life shattered, her soul crushed, her body tumbling helplessly toward death. Her wedding gown, once a masterpiece of French silk stitched by hand in the Paris ateliers of Dior, now clung to her in shredded tatters. Pearls that had been delicately embroidered into the bodice fell like raindrops as she ran, snagged by branches and ripped from their threads. Veil gone, shoes lost, makeup smeared into rivers of mascara. She was no longer the bride of Darkmoor, she was a broken silhouette tearing through the woods like prey hunted by shadows. Her knees stung, her feet raw from the stones that cut through the skin with every desperate step. Her sobs filled the night, jagged and raw, mixing with the howl of distant wolves. Her mind spun with the betrayal, Elias's cold rejection, Kylie's poisonous smirk, her parents' icy silence. Their faces chased her like specters, gnawing at her heart with every breath. She raised her head again to look at the creature. The white wolf. Massive, terrifying, beautiful in a way that made no sense. His fur gleamed like snow kissed by moonlight, his size dwarfing even the largest alphas she had ever seen. His paws dug into the earth with such power the ground itself seemed to bow beneath him. His eyes, icy blue, electric with something primal, locked on her with a hunger that was not for flesh but for possession. His breath steamed hot against her neck as he leaned in, vibrating the night air with a growl so deep it struck her bones. Before Sydney could even think, before she could form the word run, he swept her from the cliff's edge. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't slow. It was a storm breaking, a single fluid motion, unstoppable as fate itself. Suddenly she wasn't sitting anymore. She was flying. No, she was riding. Her body was lifted, thrown across the wolf's broad back. His fur was thick, warm, wild beneath her trembling fingers. She clung to him desperately, sinking her hands deep into his coat as if he were the last anchor keeping her from the abyss. The torn silk of her gown whipped violently behind her, catching on branches that snapped under his unstoppable charge. The forest blurred around them, branches cracked, stones scattered. His paws thundered against the earth with a rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of something far greater than her. His speed was unnatural, inhuman, yet in the chaos of it, she had never felt safer. Her lungs burned from crying, her throat was raw, her tears frozen against her skin. She half believed she was dreaming again, caught in some cruel trick of her subconscious where wolves carried her into darkness. But the icy bite of air on her cheeks reminded her this was real, too real. Where are you taking me?" she whispered, her voice trembling, knowing the wolf couldn't answer. But still, he seemed to understand. His pace never faltered, his body radiating heat so intense it burned away the chill of the night. Every movement screamed one silent vow, "You are mine to protect." Minutes, maybe hours, blurred into one another. Her sense of time dissolved into the relentless rhythm of his run, and then the air shifted. The forest fell behind them, the ground leveled. The scent of pine and damp earth gave way to something sharper, richer, wrought iron, stone, the faint echo of burning torches. They had reached it. The Ravenclaw estate. Sydney forced her head up, weak, dazed. Through the haze of exhaustion, she saw it rise from the darkness like a fortress carved from shadow and silver. Iron gates taller than houses, curled in intricate Gothic patterns, their steel gleaming faintly. Towering walls of black stone wrapped in ivy. Lanterns flickering against the night, their flames reflected in the windows of the colossal mansion beyond. The crest of the Ravenclaw pack, a raven with wings outstretched, sculpted in obsidian, glared down from the arch above the gate. Her lips parted. She had heard the rumors. Ravenclaw wealth rivaled monarchs, their estate a palace whispered of but rarely seen. Now here she was, not as a guest invited in, but as a broken bride carried to their gates by a beast. The wolf didn't slow. Guards at the entrance gasped, stepping back, but none dared lift a weapon. The gates creaked open with a thunderous groan, surrendering to his approach. He thundered through the courtyard, past fountains that glittered with crystal water, past marble statues of ravens carved with talons bared, past rows of sleek black cars lined like soldiers on display. Her breath hitched. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, Aston Martins, even a Bugatti. Machines that cost more than most packs earned in a year. All of it. Wealth, luxury, power. Yet none of it felt real as she clung to the wolf's back, her tears dripping into his fur. He stopped only when they reached the courtyard center. The world stilled. The pounding paws ceased. The only sound was Sydney's ragged breathing. The wolf bent low, lowering her to the cold stone ground with surprising care. Her knees buckled instantly, her body swaying, her hands scraping the smooth marble tiles. She forced her head up, just enough to see him standing before her. The firelight painted his fur silver white, each strand gleaming. His chest rose and fell with deep breaths. His eyes locked on her with such intensity she forgot the pain, the gown, even her tears. And then he changed. The shift was not soft, it was violent. Bones cracked, echoing in the courtyard. Muscles stretched and twisted, fur rippling into flesh like water pulled back from sand. His growls twisted into deep human sounds. The air trembled with it, heavy, primal. Sydney's eyes widened in horror, fascination, awe. She wanted to look away, her trembling body screamed to, but she couldn't. The wolf was gone, and in his place stood a man. Flynn Fisher, heir to the Ravenclaw pack. The first thing she noticed was his body, tall, powerful, carved like a marble statue come alive. Muscles rippled across his chest and arms, strength raw and undeniable. His skin glistened faintly, firelight tracing the ridges of his torso, highlighting every chiseled line. His hair, raven black, damp with sweat, fell in loose strands across his forehead, and his eyes, those same piercing blue eyes that had belonged to the wolf. They burned into her now, even more devastating in human form. Sydney stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. He was naked, completely, unapologetically naked. The firelight painted him in golden shadow, every detail on display. Heat flooded her cheeks, her pulse racing in a way she couldn't name. Flynn took a step forward, slow, careful, like a predator approaching prey he didn't want to startle. Her lips trembled. "You..." Her voice cracked. "You're not... How..." He didn't answer immediately. His gaze swept over her, lingering on the shredded Dior gown. The blood streaked across her bare feet, the hollow devastation in her eyes. His jaw clenched, fury flaring. Not at her, but at what had been done to her. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, resonant, steady. A voice that commanded the night itself to listen. "You're safe now." The words struck her like a blade. They shouldn't have meant anything. Not after Elias, not after Kylie, not after her parents turned their backs on her. But somehow, they did. Her lips parted, a sob clawing up her chest. But before she could speak, her body gave way. Exhaustion crushed her like a tidal wave. Her vision blurred, the marble spinning beneath her. Flynn moved fast, catching her before she could collapse. His arms, strong enough to break worlds, were shockingly gentle as he held her against him. His warmth consumed her, his scent, smoky, dark, intoxicating, filling her lungs. Her final sight before darkness claimed her was his face above hers. Blue eyes burning, raven hair falling across his forehead, his features sharper than any dream could ever conjure. And then, Sydney Smith surrendered to the dark. Chapter 2. The Stranger with Blue Eyes. The scent of polished wood and faint smoke filled Sydney's nose before her eyes fluttered open. For a moment she thought she was still falling, that the ground hadn't caught her, that her body hadn't stopped tumbling through the night. Her limbs twitched as if to brace for another impact. But when her vision cleared, she realized she was lying against something solid, warm, and alive. Strong arms held her close. Flynn Fisher. Her heart lurched, her body stiffening instantly. He carried her effortlessly through a grand hallway, his stride unhurried yet deliberate, as though every inch of the Ravenclaw estate bowed to his command. She tilted her head weakly, forcing her senses to take it in. The world around her was not the forest anymore. The walls were stone, dark and polished, each slab fitted with precision that whispered of ancient money and power. Tall windows stretched to vaulted ceilings, framed with heavy silk drapes in deep navy embroidered with threads of silver. Each torch sconce flickered with golden light, reflecting off raven insignias worked into the stone. The tapestries that lined the hall shimmered faintly when the firelight struck them, stitched with ravens taking flight across storm-gray skies, the silver threads catching like lightning. Everything about the place radiated wealth, not the kind she'd seen flaunted at weddings or social galas with gold and diamonds, but old wealth, dominance, authority, a palace dressed as a fortress. But it wasn't the estate that made her chest tighten, it was him. The man who had been a wolf, the stranger with eyes like piercing ice and hair dark as midnight. Flynn's jaw was set, his profile carved in clean, unyielding lines. His expression betrayed nothing. Not anger, not tenderness, not even curiosity. Yet there was a stillness about him that unsettled her. He was calm in a way that was unnatural, as though he carried storms inside but kept them locked beneath steel. He looked carved from strength itself, and he was carrying her like she weighed nothing at all. "No!" Sydney's voice cracked as she stirred weakly in his arms, pressing her hands against his chest. "Put me down! Please let me go!" For the first time, his gaze flicked toward her. Torchlight caught in his irises, and she froze, blue, cold, unyielding as though cut from ice. No. The single word landed heavy, final, like the slam of a locked door. Her throat tightened. "You don't even know me. You have no right—" His eyes didn't soften. "You think you still belong to them?" His voice was low, steady, the edge of steel beneath it. "They let you run. They let you break. They didn't follow." The words hit harder than she wanted to admit. Her mind flashed. Elias's rejection at the altar, her parents' stiff silence, Kylie's smirk that hadn't belonged on a sister's face, the hundreds of eyes that had watched her humiliation without so much as a step forward. They were in shock, she stammered weakly. "They didn't come for you," Flynn cut in, his tone sharper now, cutting like a blade. "They won't, because you don't matter to them, and you know it." Sydney flinched, her breath catching. The truth seared deeper than any insult. She wanted to deny it, to scream that he was wrong, that her parents had just needed time, that Elias would realize what he'd done. But the words shriveled in her throat. Flynn's jaw tightened, but only slightly. "You have no future with them, whether you accept it or not." He shifted her weight with ease, holding her closer, as though he could anchor her against the storm inside her chest. His presence was overwhelming. Heat radiating from him, muscles coiled with restrained strength, the faint scent of smoke, pine, and something darker clinging to his skin. When Sydney finally forced her voice out again, it was barely more than a whisper. "Then what am I supposed to do?" For the first time, something flickered in his gaze. Not pity, not coldness, something heavier, something dangerous. "Live," he said simply. The word vibrated inside her chest. She didn't know why, but it felt like an order, not a suggestion. By the time they reached his chambers, Sydney's body was trembling with exhaustion. Her lashes drooped, her breath came in shallow pulls, and she clung to consciousness with fragile fingers. She barely registered the massive double doors opening before she was lowered onto something impossibly soft. A bed. No, this was no ordinary bed. It was a throne disguised as one. Layers of black furs and silken sheets cocooned her, the fabric cool against her overheated skin. The mattress seemed to sink beneath her like water, molding to her body as though it had been crafted for her alone. Her fingers sank into the furs, disoriented by their luxurious texture. She forced her eyes open, and the sight of the room stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't just a room, it was a domain. High vaulted ceilings draped with dark banners that whispered faintly in the torchlight. Carved shelves rose high, filled with leather-bound books, their spines stamped with gold and silver sigils. The faint scent of cedar and aged parchment lingered, layered with the sharper tang of iron. Weapons lined one wall, displayed like art, daggers with jeweled hilts, sleek black-forged blades, and a polished spear that shimmered beneath the light. Opposite the weapons stood a mahogany desk in perfect order, maps rolled in leather bindings, papers stacked in deliberate precision, a quill resting beside a bottle of black ink. But her gaze kept snapping back to him. Flynn stood at the foot of the bed now, firelight painting his frame in shadows and gold. He had dressed, dark trousers fitted to his body, a white shirt clinging damply to his chest, the top laced loosely to reveal the ridge of muscle beneath his collarbone. His raven black hair was damp still, brushing against his forehead in soft strands. His presence filled the chamber as tangibly as the fire's warmth. Sydney swallowed hard. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But beneath it, something else stirred, curling dangerously low in her stomach. Her heart stuttered when his eyes met hers again, that piercing blue, calm, cold, yet carrying a heat that unsettled her more than any threat. Her lips parted before she could stop herself. Why are you helping me?" Flynn didn't answer at once. Instead, he moved deliberately, crouching beside the bed. A bowl of water and a folded cloth waited on the nightstand. He dipped the cloth and wrung it out with slow, practiced motions. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, yet no less certain. "Because you needed saving." Her chest tightened painfully. No one had ever said those words to her. Not her parents, not Elias, not Kylie. She had always been the one expected to endure, to hold the family name with dignity, to never falter. But here was this stranger, this man-wolf, telling her she had needed saving. And he had done it. When his hand reached for hers, she recoiled instinctively. But he only pressed the cloth gently against her bruised skin, wiping away the dirt and blood. His touch was steady, careful, firm without cruelty. Heat spread from his hand to her skin, leaving behind a lingering ache that was not entirely pain. "You don't have to," she began, her voice cracking. "I do," he interrupted, lifting his gaze briefly. His blue eyes caught hers unflinching. "You're hurt." Her breath hitched. The simple truth of it broke something inside her. She said nothing more, watching him as he worked in silence. He moved with precision, with patience she hadn't expected from someone so dangerous. He cleaned the cuts on her arm, wrapped a small bandage around her wrist where lace from her gown had torn into the flesh. Every time his fingers brushed her skin, her body betrayed her, shivers running through her, lips parting with shallow breaths. It made no sense. She wanted to demand he stop, to insist she didn't need him, but when his thumb brushed, carefully across a bruise near her collarbone, the words tangled in her throat. Instead, a soft, shaky exhale escaped her lips. She wasn't terrified of his touch. She was terrified of how much she wanted it. When he finally set the cloth aside, her wounds cleaned and dressed, Flynn leaned back on his heels, studying her. His posture was relaxed, predator at rest, but his eyes lingered on her face as though he were memorizing every line. "Rest," he said firmly. "You're safe here." The word echoed in her chest. Safe. The concept was foreign. She had never been safe, not in her parents' cold house, not under Elias's shallow gaze, not beneath the cruel whispers of her family's guests. And yet, staring into those impossible blue eyes, she almost believed him. Almost. Her lashes grew heavy, exhaustion dragging her down. She fought it, wanting to hold his gaze longer, to anchor herself in that steady blue instead of drifting into dreams. But her body betrayed her, surrendering. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was his face in the firelight, blue eyes steady, raven hair shadowing his brow. a jaw carved in stone, looking at her not as a ruined bride, not as a discarded daughter, but as though she was his. Chapter 3. A Family's Embrace. The soft sound of water dripping into a basin filled the silence of Flynn's room as he folded the cloth he had used to tend Sydney's wounds. The faint scent of cedarwood soap clung to the air, mingling with the firelight's warmth. He folded the cloth with deliberate precision, his fingers steady even as his thoughts ran restless beneath the surface. On the bed, Sydney lay propped against a mountain of pillows, her lashes heavy, her breaths uneven, half caught in sleep, half caught in the shadow of her grief. Her lips trembled even in slumber, her fingers clutching faintly at the silk sheets, as though afraid the ground beneath her might give way again. Flynn studied her in silence. Every delicate line of her face carried exhaustion and heartbreak, a fragility that unsettled him more than any enemy blade ever had. A knock broke the quiet. 3 firm raps against the wood. Flynn's head turned sharply, his expression cooling in an instant. The warmth in his gaze vanished, his body tense. He rose in a single fluid motion, placing himself instinctively between Sydney and the door. Another knock, softer this time, accompanied by a voice that slipped like music into the room. "Flynn?" The handle turned. The door creaked open before he could answer. A woman stepped inside, her presence commanding and gentle all at once. Her raven dark hair fell in soft waves down her back, the same piercing shade of blue as Flynn's eyes reflecting in hers, but warmer, glowing with a kindness that softened even the cold stone walls. She was tall, graceful, and carried herself with a kind of poise that made her silk blouse, dusting of flour across its sleeves, seem like an effortless accessory rather than a stain. Ariana Fisher, Flynn's elder sister, and behind her, filling the doorway like a shadow cast by a crown, stood a man whose presence demanded attention before he ever spoke. His build was broad, his shoulders squared in a tailored black jacket, his jaw set with a kind of severity that could silence a room. Black hair brushed back neatly, streaked with silver at the temples that only added to his authority. His dark eyes were sharp, unreadable, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments. Lucian Black, former Alpha of the Ravenclaw pack. "Why do you look pale, brother?" Ariana's tone was laced with concern as her gaze flicked over Flynn's face. She took in his damp hair, his unbuttoned shirt, the faint tension in his posture. What happened? Flynn's jaw flexed. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze flicked to the bed behind him. Ariana followed his eyes, and the moment she saw Sydney, her expression softened. Sydney lay curled in the white sheets, her skin pale against the richness of silk, her chestnut hair spilled across the pillow like a broken halo. There was a vulnerability in the way she clutched the covers, her frame too small for such a vast bed. Ariana's heart tugged. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. Her footsteps were light, deliberate, carrying warmth into the cold chamber. The air shifted. Sydney stirred, sensing movement. Her lashes fluttered open, her gaze cloudy with exhaustion. But the moment her eyes landed on Ariana, her heart seized. Panic gripped her chest. She flinched upright, clutching the sheets to her body, breath shallow and quick. But Ariana only smiled, not a smile of pity, not one laced with smugness or condescension, a smile that was soft, gentle, genuine. "You're safe," Ariana said quietly, her voice like a balm against the raw nerves strung inside Sydney. "You're safe here, with us." The words hit Sydney like a blow. Safe. It was something she had longed to hear her whole life, but never had. Not from her mother, not from her father, certainly not from Elias, who had only ever wanted the way she looked on his arm. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Ariana moved closer, lowering herself gracefully onto the edge of the bed. Her perfume, something soft and floral like white gardenias, wrapped around Sydney as she sat. Without hesitation, Ariana reached for Sydney's trembling hands and enclosed them in her own. Her palms were warm, steady. I'm Ariana, she continued gently, her blue eyes holding Sydney's without wavering. This is my brother's home, and now, her smile deepened, it can be yours too. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Sydney blinked rapidly, her throat thickening with unshed tears. The sincerity in Ariana's voice cracked the fragile walls she had built around her chest. The kindness she had been denied by her own family poured freely from a stranger. Her lips trembled. I don't even know why I'm here. Ariana leaned closer, her voice soft. Because you needed someone to catch you when you fell. Behind her, Lucian's voice rumbled, deep and steady, and because Flynn never ignores his instincts. Sydney froze. His presence was overwhelming. His tone carried no malice, but it carried weight. The weight of judgment, of history, of expectation. Her pulse quickened, a rabbit's heartbeat in her chest. Flynn finally spoke, his voice low, unyielding. She's staying here, for now. Lucian arched one dark brow, the faintest flicker of intrigue in his eyes. He didn't argue. Instead, he glanced once at Sydney, measuring, assessing, filing away conclusions she could never know. Then his gaze returned to Flynn, something unspoken passing between the two men. Ariana gave Sydney's hands a gentle squeeze before rising. Rest, sweetheart. I'll have food sent up, something light to start. Later, when you're ready, I'll show you the kitchen. You'll like it there. It always smells of bread and spices, even in winter. She smiled again, radiant in its simplicity. I promise. Sydney's throat closed with emotion. She couldn't speak. She could only nod, her vision blurring as tears threatened to spill. Ariana and Lucian finally turned to leave. Flynn didn't move from his post near the bed until the door clicked softly shut behind them. For a long moment, silence reclaimed the room. The crackle of fire, the faint rustle of silk sheets. Sydney's breath quickened, and then the memory struck. The wedding. Elias's cruel smirk as he spoke the words that destroyed her. The gasps of the crowd, her veil falling from her head, her parents' stone faces not a flicker of concern. Kylie, her own sister, stepping into the light with triumph glinting in her eyes. The whispers, the humiliation, the betrayal. It all crashed down, suffocating, crushing. Her body shook as sobs tore from her throat. She buried her face into the pillows, muffling the sound, but the grief broke free anyway, raw and jagged. She was alone, utterly, unbearably alone, or so she thought, because beyond the door Flynn hadn't gone far. He had stepped out with Ariana and Lucian, but as soon as they disappeared down the corridor, he returned. Quietly, silently, he sank to the floor, his back against the wood of her door. His head tilted back, eyes closing as he listened. He could hear her, every muffled cry, every choked sob. His chest tightened with each sound, as though her pain had found a way beneath his own ribs. His instincts screamed to go back in, to pull her against him, to smother her grief with his presence. But he knew she wasn't ready. So he stayed there, close enough to guard her, close enough to listen. The cold stone pressed against his back, but he ignored it. Hours slipped by. Her sobs rose and fell, until finally exhaustion dragged her into uneasy sleep. Only then did Flynn's body relent, his head tilting to the side, his breathing deepening. When dawn crept over the estate, spilling light through the tall windows, Sydney lay curled in a bed of silk, dreaming of broken vows and a sister's betrayal. And outside her door, the man who had saved her slept against the wood, refusing to leave her alone in the dark. The cold stone pressed against his back, but he ignored it. Hours slipped by. Her sobs rose and fell, until finally exhaustion dragged her into uneasy sleep. Only then did Flynn's body relent, his head tilting to the side, his breathing deepening. When dawn crept over the estate, spilling light through the tall windows, Sydney lay curled in a bed of silk, dreaming of broken vows and a sister's betrayal. And outside her door the man who had saved her slept against the wood, refusing to leave her alone in the dark. Chapter 4. Flynn's Burden. The dawn broke quietly over the forests of Lichen Ridge, spilling faint streaks of amber and silver across the towering pines. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, sharp with the scent of moss and damp earth. Dew clung to the blades of grass, sparkling like tiny fragments of glass scattered across the land. Inside the Ravenclaw estate, silence still reigned. The grand mansion, with its vaulted ceilings and endless corridors, slept in a hush broken only by the faint crackle of dying embers in the hearths and the distant cooing of doves nesting on the towers outside. Flynn Fisher stirred long before the household woke. His back ached from a night spent pressed against the hard stone floor outside his room's door. His body was used to discomfort. He had endured challenges, training yards, and nights beneath open skies. But the stiffness in his limbs wasn't from the hard wood. It was from restraint. When his eyes opened, his first instinct was not for himself, but for her. He turned his head toward the heavy oak door behind him, his senses sharpening. He could hear her faint breathing through the wood, uneven but steady. He could smell her faint human scent even here, tinged with silk and the cedarwood soap he had used to clean her wounds. His hand flexed at his side before he finally rose to his feet. His broad frame stretched, muscles tightening beneath his bare skin as he ran a hand through his tousled raven-black hair. He reached for the door handle, twisting it carefully, the wood creaking softly as he cracked it open. His gaze slipped inside. Sydney lay curled beneath the sheets, her body swallowed by layers of white silk and down. Her hair spilled across the pillows like fire, framing her pale face. Even in sleep, she looked impossibly fragile, her lips parted slightly, her lashes trembling as if her body still remembered the sobs that had racked her only hours ago. Flynn's chest tightened, his jaw locked. Something dangerous, primal and undeniable clawed inside him. His wolf surged, demanding that he go to her, that he wrap her in his arms, that he mark her before the world could take her away. But he didn't move. He shut the door quietly and locked it from the outside. If she woke, she would be safe. Always safe. Without another glance, Flynn strode down the hallway, his bare feet nearly soundless against the polished marble floors of the Ravenclaw estate. Sunlight had only just begun to push through the high windows, painting faint gold streaks across portraits of ancestors, kings and alphas immortalized in oil and gilded frames. Chandeliers hung silent above him, their crystals catching what little light there was. By the time Flynn stepped out into the crisp morning air, his composure had already begun to fracture. He ran, through the sprawling grounds, past the cobblestone paths lined with statues of ravens carved in black stone, past the fountains that glittered with sapphire tiles imported from Venice, past the stables filled with restless stallions bred from royal bloodlines. He ran until the polished beauty of Ravenclaw gave way to the wild forest that guarded the mansion's borders. His wolf clawed beneath his skin, restless, demanding release. But Flynn fought to keep his human form. His breath grew ragged as his feet thundered across the forest floor, the earth giving way beneath his weight. Branches lashed at his arms, tearing faint scratches across his skin. But he didn't care. Every step echoed with the memory of last night. The pull, the force that had gripped him like claws hooking into his chest, dragging him out into the night when he should have been buried in his work. He had been in his office, bent over a stack of maps and papers, contracts with wealthy families, shipments of silver, negotiations with suppliers of rare wines and fabrics. The life of an heir, disciplined and heavy. And then it had hit him. An invisible tether yanking at his heart, a howl from deep inside his wolf that would not be silenced, a desperate, frantic urge that left him no choice but to follow. His body had moved before his mind had even caught up, tearing through the forest, drawn like iron to a magnet. And there she was, Sydney, on the cliff's edge, broken, trembling, ready to fall. The memory made his lungs burn. His wolf snarled now, restless and wild. Flynn slowed, pressing his hands to his thighs as he hunched forward, his breath steaming in the cold air. He had never felt anything like it. Not with the daughters of alphas who paraded themselves before him, dressed in silk gowns, their wrists heavy with Cartier bracelets and diamond cuffs, their lips painted with the faintest hint of Chanel. They had whispered their affections, promised him futures of wealth and power, and maybe once, maybe twice, he had believed he felt something like love. But this was different. The panic that had seized him when Sydney had slipped, the raw desperation that had driven him to leap, to catch her before death could claim her. The way his chest had thundered when her body had pressed against his wolf's silver fur, the scent of her, fragile yet intoxicating. The way her trembling had seeped into his skin and made him want to shield her from the world itself. He had known the truth the moment he touched her. His mate. Sydney was his mate. And that truth terrified him more than anything. Flynn straightened, tilting his head back to look at the pale morning sky through the canopy. His fists clenched at his sides, veins standing sharp against his skin. His wolf snarled inside, furious at his restraint, pacing like a beast in chains. He could not tell her, not now, not when her heart was still bleeding. She had been rejected, humiliated, betrayed in front of an entire pack. She had been stripped of her dignity, her trust shattered, her future ripped from her hands. If he whispered the truth into her fragile heart now, she would crumble. She would see it not as salvation but as cruelty, a fresh chain when she had only just broken free. Worse, others would see her as weakness, as liability, a human Luna. The council would sneer. The old families would gossip over their champagne flutes, draped in Dior and Hermes, muttering about how Ravenclaw had chosen a broken girl instead of a power match. They would say Sydney was unworthy, incapable of leading beside him, and they would circle like vultures. No, he couldn't tell her. Not yet. Flynn pressed a hand against his chest, his breath ragged. His wolf howled, demanding release, demanding he return to her, crawl into her bed and silence her nightmares with the warmth of his arms. To mark her, to make her his before the world could steal her away. But Flynn was not just a wolf. He was heir to Ravenclaw. He was Alpha. He could not let desire rule him, so he ran again. Faster, harder. The ground trembled beneath his weight, the forest echoing with the thunder of his steps. He pushed himself until his muscles screamed, until his lungs burned, until his thoughts dulled from a roar to a low throb. When at last he returned to the estate, the sun had fully risen. Pale gold gilded the sprawling mansion, ivy climbing across its stone walls, windows gleaming like the watchful eyes of some ancient beast. The staff were already at work. Women carried baskets of fresh herbs across the courtyard. Stable hands brushed down the glossy coats of black Arabian horses. Groundskeepers swept stray leaves from the grand marble steps. Their uniforms were tailored, crisp, embroidered with the silver raven crest of the house. Every detail here, every flower, every polished brass handle, whispered of wealth, power, and careful control. "Good morning, Alpha," they greeted, bowing their heads as he passed. Some smiled, others kept their eyes lowered, sensing the simmering weight in his expression. Flynn nodded curtly to each, his face unreadable, his body taut with the strain of secrets. He climbed the grand staircase 2 at a time, sweat still damp on his bare shoulders. Every step brought him closer to the chamber that tethered him like a leash. And then, he was there. He stopped outside her door. His hand hovered over the handle, his breath caught in his throat. Even through the oak, even through layers of silence, he could sense her. Sydney, sleeping, breathing, his. Slowly, Flynn turned the handle and slipped inside. The room was bathed in soft morning light, the curtains fluttering gently with a breeze. The fire had burned low, its embers casting faint glows of red and orange. Sydney was still curled against the pillows, her brow faintly furrowed, her breath even but restless as though she dreamed of shadows. Flynn leaned against the doorframe, his chest rising and falling steadily as his eyes fixed on her. His wolf calmed at the sight of her, though his body remained tense, caught between guarding her and keeping himself from going closer. He should leave, let her rest, let her heal. But he didn't. Instead, he stood there silently, watching her sleep as the truth pressed heavier and heavier inside his chest. She would never know how close he was to breaking. Not yet. Chapter 5. The first meal. The nightmare returned. The same dream that had haunted Sydney the night before her wedding. She stood at the cliff's edge again, her bare toes curling against jagged stone as the abyss yawned beneath her. The wind was merciless, shrieking in her ears, tugging at the thin dress that clung to her frame. Her chestnut hair whipped violently across her face, strands stinging her eyes. And then, she wasn't alone. Her family was there. Her mother's eyes burned with disdain, lips pressed into a thin, cruel line. Her father's expression was no longer familiar, twisted into something hard, sharp, and foreign, something she could no longer recognize as love. And Kylie. Kylie stepped forward. Her younger sister's lips moved, words spilling out, but no sound reached Sydney. Nothing. The wind swallowed it all. She strained to catch even a fragment, her heart pounding, desperate to understand. But before she could, Kylie's hands shot out, pressed hard against her chest. The betrayal came not in words, but in touch. She fell. The cliff disappeared beneath her feet, the world swallowed whole by darkness. She screamed, her throat tearing, but no one reached for her. No one cared. The only thing that greeted her was the void, endless, merciless black. Sydney gasped awake. Her chest heaved violently, lungs dragging in air like she had been drowning. Damp strands of hair plastered against her temple. Her wide eyes darted around, wild, searching for something familiar. But this was not her room, not her bed. This was not home. And then she saw him. Flynn. He was seated beside her bed, his tall frame folded into the carved armchair at her side. His posture was relaxed in appearance, one arm resting casually along the chair's arm, one ankle hooked over his knee. But his face betrayed nothing casual. Concern carved deep shadows into his features. His piercing blue eyes, clear as winter lakes, were fixed on her with unrelenting focus. "You're safe," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. A voice meant to soothe, meant to anchor. It was only a dream. Only a dream. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, her hands twisting in the sheets. The nightmare still clung to her, heavy, as though the cliff lived in her bones. Her gaze lingered on Flynn, struck once again by the intensity of his presence. He was so controlled, so collected on the surface, yet she could feel it. The tension beneath, the storm inside him whenever his eyes lingered on her. The door creaked open, breaking the charged silence. Two women stepped in, both dressed in tailored uniforms of soft gray with silver embroidery at their cuffs, the Ravenclaw crest stitched neatly over their left breast. Their expressions were calm, respectful, but their eyes were kind. Flynn rose immediately, his chair scraping softly against the polished marble floor. His gaze flicked from Sydney to the women, then back again. "These are your handmaids," he said, his tone even but deliberate, as though the word carried a weight he wanted her to understand. "They'll take care of you this morning." Sydney blinked. "Handmaids?" The word lodged in her chest like something foreign, something too opulent to belong to her. Her brows furrowed, confusion flickering across her face, but Flynn only gave her the faintest of nods, an assurance, a command, and a promise wrapped into one, before striding to the door. "You'll need your strength," he murmured, almost to himself, before disappearing through the doorway. The women moved with practiced grace, bowing their heads slightly as they approached her. "Miss," one said softly, her voice warm, like sunlight breaking through mist. "Allow us." Before Sydney could protest, they were already at her side. Their hands were gentle yet confident, guiding her from the bed. The house was hushed except for the muffled sound of birds outside, but inside, the women carried with them an efficiency that allowed no hesitation. They led her through a doorway into a bathroom that stole her breath. The floors gleamed with ivory marble veined in gold. Gilded faucets shone under a cascade of natural light from tall arched windows. The air was perfumed with lavender and citrus, subtle yet intoxicating. At the center of the room rested an enormous sunken bath carved from pale stone, already filled with steaming water that shimmered with floating petals. Sydney froze, her lips parting. She had never seen anything like it, not in magazines, not in fantasies. The women worked quickly. They removed the remnants of her torn Dior wedding gown with delicate hands, treating the fabric like something poisonous, unworthy of touching her skin. Sydney trembled, standing vulnerable under their gaze, but not judged. When they lowered her into the bath, heat enveloped her body, seeping into every bruise, every aching muscle. She let out an involuntary sigh, her head falling back against the cool edge. Gentle fingers worked oils into her hair, massaging her scalp until the tension bled out of her shoulders. Creams, lotions, soaps scented with roses and vanilla smoothed across her skin until she felt like her body wasn't her own anymore. Soft, renewed, cleansed. For a time she forgot the weight inside her chest. When she emerged, the women wrapped her in linen towels so fine they felt like silk. They dried her hair, brushing it until it fell in soft, gleaming waves across her shoulders. And then they dressed her, not in rags, not in remnants of humiliation, but in another much more expensive Dior. She only got to wear designers on important occasions, but she now wore them casually. A pastel lilac and lavender summer dress, its delicate silk catching the light. The fabric clung gently to her form, airy yet flattering, the color making her eyes appear brighter, sharper. The bodice was simple, elegant, falling into a skirt that moved like liquid when she shifted. She stared into the mirror, stunned. She barely recognized the reflection. Her lips trembled. Was this her? The maids exchanged a small smile, as if they too saw something reborn in her. "Breakfast awaits," one whispered. Her steps were hesitant as they led her through the corridors. The estate was alive now. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, casting molten light on tapestries and polished banisters. Servants moved quietly, carrying trays of porcelain and crystal, the faint scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee drifting through the halls. And then she saw him, Flynn. He stood at the bottom of the grand staircase. Not pacing, not distracted, but waiting. He was dressed simply, in a tailored white shirt that clung to his broad shoulders and dark trousers fitted with casual precision. His raven hair was still damp from his shower, and he looked freshly sharpened, like a blade honed for battle. But his eyes, his piercing blue eyes, were fixed on her, unwavering, burning with something she could not name. For a moment the world stilled, neither moved. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. Her heart thundered. Hesitation warred with instinct, but something deeper, something she couldn't fight, pulled her forward. She placed her trembling hand into his. Warm, strong, steady. The dining room doors opened. Sydney's breath caught. High ceilings painted with elaborate murals soared above them. A massive oak table stretched down the room, draped in crystal and silver. Chandeliers glittered overhead, casting golden light across polished floors. Sunlight spilled across everything, turning silver goblets into molten fire. It wasn't just a dining room, it was a throne room in disguise. At the head of the table sat Lucien Black. His presence alone commanded the space. Dark hair, features carved sharp with age and power. His eyes, cold steel, measured everything, every person, every word, every movement. Beside him sat Ariana, Flynn's sister. Even in housewear, she radiated elegance. Her raven dark hair was swept back in a perfect knot, her posture straight, her expression both kind and calculating. She looked like royalty born, not made. Flynn pulled out a chair for Sydney, seating her beside Ariana before taking his place across from her. She said good morning to them. The first course was served. Platters of golden croissants, eggs folded into perfect creamy layers, fresh fruit glistening like jewels, pomegranates, blackberries, figs. Honey shimmered in crystal dishes, cheese wheels cut with surgical precision. Sydney hesitated, then took a bite. Her eyes widened. This is incredible. Who is your chef? Lucien's lips twitched faintly, his gaze flicking toward Ariana. I happen to have the best gift in the world. Ariana's soft laugh floated across the table. She brushed her fingers against her husband's hand. It was me, she admitted, pride glinting in her sapphire eyes. Sydney's jaw dropped. You? This is better than anything I've ever tasted in my life. Compliments spilled from her lips before she could stop them. Her smile bloomed, radiant and genuine. Flynn couldn't look away. His wolf clawed at him, demanding he close the distance, touch her, claim her. For a moment Sydney forgot betrayal, forgot cliffs, forgot weddings that had ended in ruins. She laughed with Ariana, glowed under Flynn's gaze, and let herself breathe. But reality crept back too soon. Her fork paused midair. Her smile faltered. Shadows reclaimed her chest. Ariana reached across the table, taking her hand gently. You're safe here, Sydney. You don't have to carry it alone. The words unlocked her. Piece by jagged piece, Sydney spoke. Her nightmare. The wedding. Elias's rejection. Kylie's betrayal. Her parents' cold indifference. The truth of her adoption. The pack's collective cruelty. Their stares that stripped her bare. Her voice trembled, cracked, but she forced the words free until silence claimed her. Flynn's fists curled beneath the table, his knuckles white. His jaw flexed, fury etched into every line of his face. Ariana's eyes glistened, her grip tightening around Sydney's hand. Lucien, however, remained still. His gaze was sharp, calculating, weighing Sydney not as a girl but as a risk. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, deliberate, cutting. Flynn, you've brought danger to this house. If the Silverfangs demand her return, if the Council learns of this, there will be consequences, severe ones. Even adopted, she is theirs. Sydney's breath caught. Fear slammed into her chest, but Flynn didn't hesitate. She stays, he said, his voice steel. If they want her, they'll have to come through me, through Ravenclaw. His words were more than defiance, they were a vow. Lucien's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. It was Ariana who spoke next, her voice soft but unshaken. She is family now, and I won't let anyone treat her otherwise. Sydney's throat closed, her heart squeezed painfully. For the first time in her life, someone outside of it claimed her, and for the first time since her world had shattered, she believed she might not be alone. Chapter 6. Elias's Return. The Ravenclaw estate had not known peace for long. Barely a day had passed since Sydney had sat at the grand dining table, trembling as she recounted the story of her betrayal, when the first disturbance stirred. The morning had begun quietly. The estate shimmered under soft sunlight, the wide lawns trimmed with perfection, the fountain at the center of the courtyard cascading water in a steady, soothing rhythm. Birds skimmed over the rooftops, the mansion's high windows glittered, and the smell of fresh bread from the kitchens curled into the corridors. Inside, Ariana's laughter had carried faintly down the marble halls, and Sydney, wrapped in a light silk robe, had sat by one of the windows in Flynn's room, hugging her knees to her chest. For once, the silence did not suffocate her. It calmed her. She was beginning to think, maybe, just maybe, Ravenclaw could become something close to sanctuary. But peace was fragile, and it shattered in a single heartbeat. The sharp echo of boots against the stone courtyard pierced the air. It was not the stride of Ravenclaw guards. Those were measured, familiar, protective. This sound was heavier, harsher, an invasion. The heavy iron gates groaned open against the force of an army's entrance. Elias Darkmoor had come. He was not alone. Behind him, a line of broad-shouldered men in fitted black uniforms advanced in perfect formation. They moved like shadows, disciplined and silent, their weapons gleaming faintly in the pale morning light. Sniper guns, daggers, short swords, and silver-edged spears hung from their belts. Their faces betrayed nothing, but the force of their arrival was enough to rattle even the seasoned Ravenclaw guards stationed along the courtyard walls. In an instant, Ravenclaw's steel rose in answer. Guards in navy and silver uniforms poured into formation, forming a barrier at the base of the stairs. Shields gleamed, spears locked. The air thickened until it pulsed, humming with dominance, challenge, the unspoken promise of blood if one wrong step was taken. The estate itself seemed to hold its breath. Flynn was already moving before anyone called for him. His wolf surged inside, clawing against his control, demanding release. Fury sharpened his every step as he descended from the grand staircase inside the mansion, his bare feet barely silent on the Persian runner carpet. He pushed through the front doors with a force that rattled the hinges and stepped onto the wide, stone steps that overlooked the courtyard. The instant his gaze locked on Elias, his body tensed like a bow drawn taut. The fire in his blue eyes was the kind that could melt through steel. "Sydney," Elias said, his voice ringing across the courtyard, his posture tall, his tone commanding. "Come out." The name struck the air like a weapon. Sydney had followed instinctively, her chest tightening as she peeked from behind Flynn. She shouldn't have, but her body moved of its own accord, drawn to the sound of that familiar voice, to the sight of the man who had destroyed her world. Her slender form trembled, but not only with fear. As her chestnut eyes locked on him, rage began to rise, rage at his betrayal, at his arrogance, at the ruin he had made of her life with one careless choice. Elias stood proud. His dark hair was slicked back, the cut sharp and deliberate. His jaw was chiseled, his designer suit fitted to perfection, a silver pocket square glinting at his chest. He was every bit the Alpha of Silverfang, polished, powerful, untouchable, or so he wanted the world to believe. But Sydney saw the arrogance in his eyes, the shadow of cruelty lurking beneath the expensive facade. "You don't belong here," Elias declared, his voice booming across the courtyard. "You're mine. You were meant to be mine. And no matter what lies you've convinced yourself of, you're still Silverfang. Still bound to us. Still bound to me." Flynn moved without hesitation, his frame cutting sharply in front of Sydney, blocking her from Elias's sight. His muscles coiled, his dominance radiating outward in an almost physical wave. His voice, low and vibrating with controlled fury, was lethal. "She is not yours." The Ravenclaw guards shifted, their spears gleaming under the morning sun as they tightened formation, a living wall between their alpha and the intruders. But Elias's men didn't flinch. The tension was so heavy it was suffocating. Each breath drawn seemed to threaten violence. And then Sydney's voice cut through the storm. She stepped out from behind Flynn, her hands trembling but her chin lifting, defiance threading into her fragile strength. Her chest heaved, memories pounding in her head, the altar, the vows Elias had spat out, Kylie's hand in his, her family's silence, the abyss of betrayal swallowing her whole. "No," she said, her voice unsteady at first. But it grew, rising in strength. "I don't belong to you, Elias. Not now. Not ever. You betrayed me. You chose her, my sister, over me. And whatever we were meant to be, you destroyed it yourself." The words hit him like stones hurled across a canyon. For a fraction of a second, Elias flinched, barely. But it was enough. Flynn saw it. Sydney saw it. And for the first time since the cliff, Sydney felt something close to satisfaction burn in her chest. "You'll regret this," Elias spat, but the venom in his voice lacked conviction. His arrogance was cracking, his grip on control slipping. "No," Sydney snapped, her tone sharp, unyielding. Her eyes burned as she took a step closer, her voice carrying for all to hear. "You're the one who will regret this." Silence blanketed the courtyard, every guard on edge, every wolf waiting for the spark that would ignite war. The spark never came. Not yet. The great double doors of the mansion creaked open again. Lucian Black and Ariana Fisher stepped out. The air shifted instantly. Ariana moved like nobility, her dark hair flowing loose over her silk blouse, her eyes blazing with a quiet but undeniable power. Beside her, Lucian was immovable, a monument of authority, his dark hair glinting, his jaw set like stone, his every stride demanding submission. Elias's men stiffened. Even Elias, with all his arrogance, bowed his head slightly. Respect, or fear, flashed across his features at the sight of the former Alpha and Luna of Ravenclaw. "Lucian," Elias began, forcing composure into his tone, "I come to take what belongs to Silverfang, to take her back without unnecessary bloodshed." Lucian's voice, when it came, was quiet but lethal. "You barge into my estate with armed men and dare to speak of unnecessary bloodshed?" His words carried across the courtyard like rolling thunder. "You insult my house, my Alpha, and you disrespect me." Elias's jaw clenched. Still, he pushed forward, voice clipped. "Flynn broke pack law. He trespassed on Darkmoor grounds and abducted Sydney while she was not in her right mind. She is Silverfang, and she must be returned." Lucian turned, his steel-gray eyes flicking briefly toward Flynn. Flynn's posture was rigid, his dominance blazing. His hand, without thought, had reached back to steady Sydney, whose fingers clung desperately to his, her chestnut hair trembling around her pale face. For Lucian, the image pulled at something deep inside, an echo of a younger self, standing with Ariana at his back, swearing to the world he would destroy anyone who tried to take her. When his gaze returned to Elias, it was colder than winter steel. "She does not belong to you," Lucian said firmly. His words carried weight, finality. "She belongs to no one but herself, and she is more than capable of deciding where she wishes to stay. She is Ravenclaw now." The words were a strike. Elias's pride cracked, his men shifting uneasily. "And you," Lucian continued, his voice deepening, "made your second mistake today. Your first was betraying her. Your second was storming into my house with weapons drawn. That is not only a violation of pack law, it is an insult that demands retribution." Flynn stepped forward then, his presence erupting like a tidal wave. The ground itself seemed to hum beneath his power, his blue eyes igniting with fire. He reached back and laced his fingers with Sydney's trembling hand, his grip unyielding, anchoring her to him. "This ends now," Flynn said, his voice cutting like a blade. "You will leave. You will not step foot here again. And if you so much as look at Sydney in a way that unsettles her, I will end you. I don't care if Silverfang backs you. I will burn them down and salt the ashes." The declaration struck like lightning. The Ravenclaw guards roared in approval, weapons raised, the courtyard vibrating with unity and a promise of war. Pride gleamed in Ariana's eyes, a subtle smile curving her lips. Lucian's expression remained hard, but the faintest glimmer of approval passed across his face as he placed a firm hand on Flynn's shoulder, an unspoken acknowledgement that his heir had claimed his place as Alpha. Elias's face darkened, fury twisting his features. But he was outnumbered, outmatched, outplayed. "This isn't over," he hissed. His pride carried him, but his voice cracked just enough for Sydney to notice. With a sharp wave of his hand, he turned on his heel. His men fell into line behind him, retreating with rigid precision. The iron gates groaned shut, slamming with a finality that echoed through the courtyard. The tension did not ease immediately. Ravenclaw guards lingered, scanning, bracing, until Lucian gave the silent signal for them to stand down. The courtyard exhaled as weapons lowered, though the taste of war still lingered in the air. Flynn did not release Sydney's hand. Not as they crossed the courtyard. Not as they stepped through the great double doors. not as they climbed the sweeping staircase toward his wing of the mansion. Only when the heavy oak door of his bedroom shut firmly behind them did he turn, pulling her into his arms with a ferocity that nearly broke her. His embrace was fierce, desperate, protective, his heart thundering against hers. His lips pressed against her hair as his voice broke, whispering into the strands, "I'll never let him near you again. Never. I swear it." Sydney froze at first, her body stiff. Her mind screamed at her to remember the betrayal, the danger, the uncertain future, but her heart, traitorous and aching, betrayed her. Her arms lifted slowly, wrapping around him, clinging to the only anchor she had left. She didn't understand why she felt what she did, why her chest burned with something terrifying yet soothing when he held her, why her soul seemed to settle when his heartbeat echoed against her ear. But she didn't fight it. For the first time in days, Sydney let herself rest in someone's arms and believe, just for a fragile moment, that maybe, just maybe, she was safe. Chapter 7. The Silverfang Smith. Family Fall. The Ravenclaw estate had grown quieter since the day Elias stormed through its gates. The echoes of that confrontation still lingered in the halls, an invisible tension that wrapped itself around everyone within the mansion's high stone walls. Guards doubled their patrols, their polished black and silver uniforms catching the morning light as they marched along the perimeter. Servants whispered more carefully now, heads bowed, their conversations clipped as though afraid their words might summon another storm. Flynn, though ever composed, could not hide his unease from Sydney. She noticed it in the way his jaw would tighten whenever Elias's name was spoken too close, in the flicker of blue fire in his eyes whenever her safety was questioned, in the silence he carried when he thought no one was watching. The Ravenclaw Alpha carried the weight of her protection on his shoulders, and though Sydney longed to thank him, to tell him how much it mattered, the words always died in her throat. It was on one of those hushed mornings that Sydney wandered into the grand kitchen. The space was vast, as large as the dining hall in her father's Silverfang estate had once been, but warmer, softer. The counters gleamed with pale marble veined in gold, sunlight spilling across them through arched windows. Copper pans and polished silver utensils hung neatly above a long preparation table, and the faint scent of fresh herbs, garlic and simmering broth wrapped around the air like a comforting blanket. Sydney hesitated at the threshold, smoothing the skirt of her pastel silk dress, a gift Ariana had insisted she keep, tailored by Dior seamstresses flown in just for her. She had never felt comfortable in such expensive fabric, the delicate buttons catching the light like pearls. She told herself she didn't belong in such things, yet here, surrounded by Ravenclaw's wealth and quiet power, she found herself slowly growing used to it. Only Ariana stood inside the kitchen that morning. She was bent over the counter, sleeves of her white cashmere blouse rolled elegantly past her elbows, her dark hair tied loosely behind her head. A diamond tennis bracelet glittered at her wrist as her hands moved with practiced ease, chopping vegetables with graceful precision. "You shouldn't be working in here," Sydney said softly, her voice careful, almost shy. She still struggled to speak freely in Ariana's presence, though the former Luna's kindness had warmed her more quickly than she expected. Ariana lifted her gaze with a small, knowing smile. "I like cooking. Always have. It reminds me of simpler days, before the weight of titles and power." She slid the diced carrots into a pot of steaming broth, the steam curling against her flawless skin. "And besides, Flynn told me you haven't been eating much." Heat rushed to Sydney's cheeks. She looked down, fiddling with her sleeve, embarrassed. "I didn't want to trouble anyone." Ariana's eyes softened, though her voice remained firm. "You're not trouble. You're family now. And in this house we take care of family." The words struck Sydney deep, piercing a tender place in her chest she didn't know still existed. Family. The word sounded so foreign on Ariana's tongue, and yet so desperately what Sydney had been craving all her life. She opened her mouth to reply, but the door at the far end of the kitchen swung open. One of the workers stepped in, a young man dressed in the crisp gray and black Ravenclaw uniform. His face was pale, his eyes lowered, his tone hushed as though his news carried too much weight for the morning light. "Lady Ariana," he said with a bow, his voice tight. "You should know. Rumors are spreading fast through Lichen Ridge about the Smith family." At once, Sydney's breath caught in her throat. Her spine stiffened, her fingers tightening around the marble counter. Ariana frowned, setting aside the wooden spoon in her hand. "What rumors?" The worker hesitated, his gaze flicking nervously toward Sydney. He seemed reluctant, as though his words might cut too deep. Finally, he swallowed and said, "The Smith family has fallen. Bankrupt, stripped of their position, Christopher Smith no longer holds the Alpha seat of Silverfang." The spoon Sydney had been absent-mindedly holding slipped from her fingers and clattered against the counter. The sharp sound echoed like a crack of thunder in her ears. "What?" Her voice broke, disbelief shattering through every syllable. The worker looked at her then, pity heavy in his expression. "It's true, Lady Sydney. The Darkmoors hold the Silverfang Alpha title now." Ariana's brows drew together in sharp confusion. "The Darkmoors... You mean Elias?" The worker nodded grimly. "Yes. The moment the Smiths let him mark Kylie their eldest daughter, they lost their influence and support from the council. Elias abandoned them. He took the Alpha title for himself. Some say he betrayed Christopher Smith in council, stripping him of what little power he had left. Now, Silverfang answers to Elias Darkmoor, and no longer to your family." The kitchen seemed to shrink around Sydney, the walls pressing closer. She swayed where she stood, gripping the marble edge for balance. Memories flashed in her mind, the cold glare of her father at the wedding, her mother's silence like a blade, Kylie's hand intertwined with Elias's at the altar, betrayal upon betrayal now crowned with ruin. They've lost everything?" she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of it. "Yes," the worker said softly. "The Smith family is bankrupt. Their land stripped. The council has already confirmed it. Christopher Smith is no longer Alpha." He bowed once more and left, the heavy door closing behind him with a hollow thud. The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the quiet bubbling of broth filled the room. Sydney pressed a hand against her ribs, as though she could hold herself together by sheer will. She had told herself 1,000 times that she hated them, that after the way they had cast her aside, she never wanted to hear the name Smith again. She had sworn she would not waste another tear on them, and yet her heart broke anyway. She pictured her father, proud and unyielding, now brought low. Her mother, once elegant in Chanel gowns and Cartier jewels, stripped of the only thing she cared for, status. And Kylie, her sister, who had betrayed her so effortlessly. Even she would feel the sting of this fall. "I shouldn't care," Sydney whispered, her voice trembling as her hands shook against the counter. "After everything they did to me, I shouldn't care." Ariana was beside her instantly, her movements graceful yet fierce, like a queen comforting her wounded. She laid a hand on Sydney's arm, her blue eyes unwavering. "Of course you care. That's because you have a heart. You still see them as your family, no matter how cruelly they treated you." Sydney's tears came fast and hot, slipping down her cheeks before she could stop them. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "They never wanted me. They looked at me like I was nothing. And yet hearing this," her voice cracked, breaking apart. "Why does it still hurt so much?" Ariana drew her close, holding her like a sister. The scent of her Chanel perfume mixed with the herbs simmering on the stove, a strange blend of elegance and warmth. "Because betrayal doesn't erase love," Ariana murmured. "It only scars it. You loved them, Sydney, even if they didn't deserve it." The words broke something loose inside her, and Sydney cried harder, letting the grief she hadn't realized she carried pour out of her. After what felt like forever, Ariana pulled back gently. She cupped Sydney's face in her hands, her thumb brushing away a tear. Listen to me. Whatever happens to the Smiths, it is not your burden anymore. You are not responsible for their fall. You are free from them now. You are here. With us. With Flynn. At the mention of Flynn, Sydney's chest tightened in a different way. Her mind conjured him instantly. The sharp blue of his eyes, the way his broad shoulders had shielded her from Elias, the fierce grip of his hand in hers that day in the courtyard. Her pulse quickened, betraying her confusion. Ariana caught the flicker of emotion in her gaze and smiled faintly, knowingly. You don't have to decide what you feel yet. Just let yourself breathe. Let yourself heal. Sydney nodded shakily. Her tears had dried, but the ache in her chest lingered like an old wound reopened. She turned back to the counter, staring at the untouched soup Ariana had prepared. The golden broth reflected the morning light, steam curling lazily above it, but she could not lift the spoon to her lips. Her family had fallen. Elias had betrayed them as easily as he had betrayed her, and still, despite everything, they were hers, and she could not kill the part of her that mourned them. Pressing her hands tightly together, she whispered into the silence of the Ravenclaw kitchen, as though confessing to no one but herself. Why does caring hurt so much? Chapter 8. A Bond in Bloom. The days after the news of the Smith family's downfall passed more quietly than Sydney expected. The Ravenclaw estate, though vast and intimidating in its architecture of marble pillars, gilded staircases and chandeliers that dripped like frozen rain, became something of a sanctuary. Its echoing halls no longer whispered about betrayal or Elias's looming shadow, but carried softer sounds. The delicate clink of glassware as servants prepared breakfast trays, the low hum of Ariana's laughter drifting from the kitchen, and the deep, steady rhythm of Flynn's footsteps when he passed Sydney's door in the mornings. Sydney often lingered at her window, watching the manicured lawns that spread like emerald silk across the estate's grounds. She had grown up surrounded by wealth in the Silverfang house. Her mother had prized designer gowns from Balmain, and Ellie Saab, her father, had collected rare cars that sat idle in garages too polished to be touched. But there was something different here. Ravenclaw wealth was quieter, not less luxurious but less gaudy. Their taste leaned toward refinement rather than ostentation, a kind of elegance that whispered instead of shouted. And in that quiet, Sydney began to breathe again. Her heart still ached with the rejection of her family. The wound was deep, unyielding. At night, the nightmare of the cliff returned often, sending her bolt upright in her bed, clutching her silk sheets as though they could anchor her to safety. She would wake with her body trembling, her throat raw from unspoken screams, still seeing Kylie's eyes gleaming with betrayal. But in the daytime, she found herself held back from falling into those shadows, and most of that was Flynn. He had a way of pulling her back to the present without forcing her. He never demanded that she smile or that she forget. Instead, he simply showed up, steady and constant, like a stone in a storm. On the third morning after the Smith collapse, when the sun streamed through her tall windows and painted her pale walls in soft gold, he appeared at her door. He wore a simple white linen shirt, open at the collar, the sleeves rolled to his forearms. His trousers were dark, tailored, though a little rumpled, as if he had run his hand down them too many times in restless thought. His hair was disheveled in a way that wasn't careless but unstudied, like he'd brushed it back with his fingers and moved on. "Walk with me," he said. No explanation, no demand. Just a simple offer, his blue eyes holding hers with calm certainty. Sydney hesitated, her hand lingering on the edge of her door. A part of her still feared stepping too close to him. He was an alpha, a man whose strength could break stone. But beneath that power was something she didn't yet understand, something that made her chest tighten in a way she didn't know how to name. Yet when she looked into his eyes, steady and searching, she nodded. The Ravenclaw gardens stretched out like a hidden paradise behind the estate. Not the clipped, manicured lawns Sydney had known at Silverfang, but a world alive with color and design. A labyrinth of hedges carved with precision, marble fountains whose streams of water sparkled like crystal in the morning light, arched stone bridges crossing over streams that shimmered like molten glass. Rare flowers grew in every corner, orchids imported from Singapore, lilies bred in controlled glasshouses, lavender roses cultivated by hand. The air carried the fragrance of jasmine and fresh grass, mingling with the faint salt of the nearby sea. Flynn walked a pace ahead of her, his hands in his pockets, his stride confident yet unhurried. He knew every path, every hidden alcove. "You know every inch of this place," Sydney said softly, letting her fingertips brush across a row of lavender roses, their petals pale as moonlight. Flynn glanced at her, his lips curving faintly. "It's home. I memorized it the way some memorize battlefields. Every turn, every corner. When you've lost enough, you cling to the things you're allowed to keep." Sydney paused. His words carried weight, the kind of weight born only from scars. Her eyes flicked to him, studying the way his jaw tightened, the flicker of memory in his gaze. "Flynn," she said carefully, What happened to you before all this? Before the estate? Before Ravenclaw?" For a long moment he was silent. He led her through a vine-covered archway, then down a stone path toward a willow tree whose branches hung low like curtains of green silk. At its base sat a carved stone bench, worn smooth by time. He gestured for her to sit, then settled beside her, leaning back slightly with his eyes fixed on the fountain ahead. "Lucian," he said finally. "He's not just the former Alpha of this house. He's my father, not by blood but in every way that matters. He found me when I was a teenager." Sydney stilled, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Ariana was already here," Flynn continued, his voice low, "working as a chef. Lucian had hired her because she was exceptional, even then. We were both lost, broken, really. And Lucian gave us a place, a home, protection, family." The word caught Sydney in the chest. Flynn's tone hardened slightly. "Lucian wasn't just a protector. He fought for us. Derek Blackthorne." His jaw clenched sharply at the name. "We thought he really loved Ariana, until she went to his family gathering and they looked down on her. He rejected Ariana because we were nobodies with no family name. But when Lucian valued her, she became desirable by Lycan Ridge's alphas. So Derek came back. He tried to claim Ariana. Force her. She rejected him, but he wouldn't let go. He came for her, and he nearly broke us. He stabbed Lucian. I was barely 13, but I shifted for the first time that night, in a warehouse that smelled of blood and steel." Sydney gasped softly, her throat tightening. She could see it in her mind, the boy Flynn once was, unready and raw, thrown into violence he hadn't chosen, forced to bleed to protect what little family he had left. "What happened?" she whispered. Flynn turned his head, his blue eyes sharp as memory flared. "We won. Barely. Ariana nearly lost Lucian that night, and I nearly lost both of them. But it was the first time I understood what it meant to fight for something worth bleeding for. Lucian married Ariana and adopted me. I became heir to Ravenclaw at just 13, and now I'm the Alpha." The silence that followed was thick, humming with his words. Without thinking, Sydney reached out, her hand brushed against his. Tentative but real. His body went taut at the contact, the wolf beneath his skin stirring, restrained but restless. He turned his head toward her, his gaze burning. "And now?" she asked softly. His voice was steady when he answered. "Now I'll protect them, both of them, always. And you." Her heart stopped for a beat, then stumbled into a faster rhythm. She pulled her hand back quickly, flustered, her pulse betraying her. The days stretched into a new rhythm after that. Flynn, for all his brooding presence and Alpha's edge, had a surprisingly persistent way of coaxing her into small joys. One evening, long after the house had gone quiet, she heard a knock on her door. When she opened it, Flynn stood there, a silver tray balanced effortlessly in his hands. On it, a steaming cup of cocoa, rich and dark, topped with delicate froth. A plate of fresh strawberries, gleaming red, and, curiously, a mischievous grin on his lips. "You're awake late," he said simply, stepping inside. She raised a brow, arms crossed loosely over her silk robe. "And so are you. I brought reinforcements." He set the tray on her bed, moving to sit in the chair by her window as though it was the most natural thing in the world. She sank onto the bed, cradling the cocoa in her hands. It was decadent, velvet smooth against her tongue, warming her from the inside out. The strawberries were sweet, their juice staining her lips. She laughed softly at the absurdity of it. This Alpha feared across Lichen Ridge, sneaking into her room with midnight snacks like a mischievous schoolboy. "You're impossible," she said, shaking her head. "Good," he answered, his eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction. He didn't look away from her smile, as though it was something rare, something precious. And sometimes, when he wasn't tempting her with food or coaxing her through gardens, he simply talked. Their conversations stretched into the night, hours passing unnoticed as he described Lichen Ridge and its ancient houses. The Stormbanes, he told her one evening, pacing her room with restless energy as she curled against a pillow, listening. They control the ports. Old money, ruthless but disciplined. They've been around since the first wolves appeared in Sintra. If you've ever eaten a fish in Lichen Ridge, odds are it came from them. She giggled softly. "The fish lords?" His lips twitched. "Don't ever call them that to their faces." He went on, painting portraits of the Ashclaws. Traitors, sharp with words and sharper with contracts. The Blackthorns, violent, feared, their reputations soaked in blood. The Redwoods, rooted in tradition so old it weighed like chains. The DeLucas, cunning financiers. The Cruz family, power woven through the courts. The Cruz and DeLucas have an old family feud, but I think they'll eventually resolve in the future. "And the Silverfangs," Sydney whispered at last, her voice fading. Flynn stopped pacing. His eyes hardened, his shoulders stiff. Once powerful, now fractured, and Elias holds the title not because of strength, but because of deceit. The name cut through her like glass, but Flynn's voice softened when he added, "You're not them, Sydney. Whatever choices they made, whatever lies they clung to, it's not who you are." And so, in those quiet days, Sydney found something she thought she had lost forever. Laughter. It slipped from her lips in the gardens, when Flynn teased her about wrinkling her nose at bitter tea. It rang in the halls when Ariana caught them sneaking pastries late at night, and scolded them like children. It crept into mornings when she'd wake to find a bloom, sometimes a white rose, sometimes a midnight blue one, resting on her nightstand. Flynn never admitted to placing them there, but she knew, her heart, fragile and bruised, began to stir again. Not healed, not whole, but alive. And though she buried it deep, though she never dared say it aloud, Sydney knew the truth that scared her more than Elias ever had. She was falling. Chapter 9. Blood Ties Broken. The night was quiet at Ravenclaw Estate. Too quiet. The chandeliers glowed dimly in the long marbled corridors, their crystals catching the last shimmer of firelight. The house usually hummed with subtle life, servants exchanging words in hushed tones, the faint clink of china being cleared, Lucian's low voice murmuring from his study. But tonight, it was different. The estate felt wrapped in velvet silence, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the forest exhaled softly. The wind whispered through the ancient trees, carrying with it the rustle of shifting leaves. Somewhere far away, an owl gave a single haunting hoot, then silence again. Even the night creatures of Lichen Ridge seemed to know something was wrong. Sydney sat curled in one of the Ravenclaw drawing-room chairs. her knees tucked beneath her pastel silk dress. The fire flickered low in the hearth, throwing amber light across the room's gold-trimmed paneling and plush velvet drapes. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her sleeve, twisting the expensive fabric as though it might keep her hand steady. Flynn wasn't here. He had left earlier that morning on business, called to oversee matters at the southern borders. He hadn't explained much, only that it was necessary, only that it couldn't wait. His departure had left her with an uneasy hollow in her chest. His presence had always been like a shield, silent, steady, but unbreakable. Without him, she felt exposed, as though a layer of armor had been stripped from her. She had tried not to show it. She had smiled when Ariana brewed tea and teased her gently about nibbling pastries instead of eating real food. She had nodded politely when Lucien crossed the room earlier, his broad shoulders wrapped in a cashmere coat, his quiet authority filling the space. All is well, he had told her before disappearing back into his study. But Sydney had noticed the faint tension in his jaw, the way his hand lingered at the hilt of the silver dagger strapped to his belt. Even Ariana, warm and gracious as always, had been strangely protective that night, hovering as if she could sense the air thickening with unease. The house felt safe, guarded, but safety, Sydney was beginning to learn, was only ever an illusion. The first sound. It began with something so small she almost ignored it. A faint creak, distant but sharp, like weight shifting where no one should have been. At first she told herself it was nothing. The estate was vast, its halls and wings sprawling like a labyrinth. It wasn't unusual to hear echoes from the servants' quarters or the shifting of old wood. But then the servant who had gone to fetch linens from the back corridor didn't return. Minutes passed. Long, stretching minutes where the silence grew heavier. Ariana frowned into her teacup, setting it down with care before glancing toward the corridor. "Stay here," she said, her voice quiet but edged with a firmness that made Sydney's heart stutter. Before Sydney could protest, another sound split the silence. Crack, wood splintering. Then another. And then the sharp, unmistakable shatter of glass. Lucien's voice thundered through the halls, deep and commanding, the sound shaking the chandelier above Sydney's head. "To arms! Intruders!" The estate erupted. The attack. Shadows poured into the mansion like a flood. They came through the broken windows, through doors forced open from within. Men clad in dark leather and iron-studded armor, faces obscured beneath black hoods. Their blades gleamed beneath the candlelight, dripping with intent. They didn't roar or scream. They moved with precision, each step practiced. They weren't raiders, they were assassins. Sydney barely had time to scream before Ariana was on her feet, her silk skirt ripping at the hem as she yanked Sydney back. In her other hand was a dagger, unsheathed so quickly it was as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. The steel glinted in her grip, steady, sure. "Stay behind me," Ariana ordered, her eyes narrowing as two masked men surged into the drawing room. Lucien was already a storm in the hall beyond. His massive frame crashed into the first intruder, his strength snapping bones like twigs. He fought with the precision of a seasoned alpha, his movements brutal but efficient. A man's blade scraped against his ribs, but Lucien spun, slamming his attacker into the wall so hard the plaster cracked. Still, more kept coming. Wave after wave of dark figures poured in through hidden entrances. Someone had let them in. Sydney targeted. The clash of steel filled the mansion. Servants screamed, ducking under tables, while guards sprinted to meet the assault. Furniture splintered. Chandeliers swayed dangerously. The marble floor slicked with blood. Sydney pressed herself against the wall, her breath coming fast and shallow, the copper scent of blood thick in the air. She flinched as one assassin's blade missed Ariana's shoulder by inches, embedding itself into the carved oak doorframe. Ariana spun, her dagger cutting across his throat in a swift, merciless stroke. The man collapsed at Sydney's feet, and in his dying breath, He rasped words that froze her blood. "The Smith family sends their regards. You should have stayed buried in shame." Her entire body went cold. Not rogues, not mercenaries, not rivals of Ravenclaw, her family. Ariana didn't hesitate. She shoved Sydney back and drove her blade into the man's chest. He fell without another word, blood soaking the expensive Persian rug beneath him. But Sydney's ears rang with what he had said. Her family had sent them. Her knees weakened, and the world tilted. They weren't content with giving her away, with replacing her, with tearing her apart. They wanted her erased so completely that even her memory would be a stain. Chaos. The battle grew louder. The Ravenclaw guards clashed against the assassins, steel ringing against steel, shouts echoing through every hall, gunshots firing. Lucien was unstoppable. He ripped through his enemies like a force of nature, his fury radiating in every blow. When he caught sight of a traitorous servant, one of their own staff who had opened the doors to let the killers inside, his rage exploded. He lifted the man by the throat, eyes blazing. "You dare betray this house?" he roared, his voice shaking the very air. And with a snap, he ended him, dropping the limp body like discarded trash. Ariana fought like fire itself. Every movement was fluid, her daggers flashing in arcs of steel. She shielded Sydney at every turn, pushing her back whenever an enemy lunged too close. But Sydney's terror only grew sharper with each voice that shouted her name. They weren't here for Lucien. Not Ariana, not even Flynn. They were here for her. One blade slipped past Ariana's guard, grazing Sydney's arm. Hot pain seared her flesh, crimson blood soaking into her pale pink sleeve. She gasped, stumbling, clutching the wound as her dress bloomed red. Ariana caught her, eyes wide with fury. "Stay down!" But Sydney barely heard her. Her thoughts spiraled. "They want me dead. My family wants me dead." The aftermath. When the last body fell, silence crept back into the halls, broken only by ragged breathing. The air reeked of iron and smoke, broken glass glittering across the marble like fallen stars. Guards dragged corpses out into the night, their boots leaving bloody streaks across the once pristine floors. Ariana knelt on the rug, cradling Sydney against her chest. Sydney's sleeve was soaked with blood, her face pale as moonlight, but her eyes were wide, hollow, staring into nothing. "They want me gone," she whispered hoarsely, her voice breaking. "Even now. After everything. My own family sent them." Ariana's hand trembled as she cupped Sydney's cheek. "No. Listen to me. You are not theirs anymore. You are not their pawn, their sacrifice, or their enemy to destroy. You are ours now. Do you understand? You're my family, my sister." Sydney's tears spilled hot and heavy, streaking her cheeks. The wound on her arm throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. Something had shattered inside her, something that had clung desperately to the hope that maybe, just maybe, her family had once loved her. Lucien approached slowly, blood spattering his fine coat, his expression carved in stone. His gaze lingered on Sydney, then softened just slightly. He crouched, placing one heavy hand on her shoulder. "They made their choice," he said, his voice like thunder rolling low and certain. "And now we will make ours." It was a vow, a promise, but Sydney could barely hear it over the breaking in her heart. Her blood had betrayed her. Her ties to the Smiths were severed irrevocably. Forever. Chapter 10. The Alpha's Fury. The call reached Flynn before dawn. He had been deep in the forest, miles away on the outskirts of Lichen Ridge, overseeing border negotiations and trade routes. Merchants from the east had come to discuss passage through Ravenclaw territory, their voices carrying into the cold night. To anyone else, this meeting might have seemed important, an opportunity to show strength, to tighten Ravenclaw's grasp on wealth and influence. But the moment the call came in, Flynn's world shifted. "Alpha," the man rasped, falling to one knee in the dirt. "The estate, an attack. Assassins breached the walls. Lord Lucian and Lady Ariana fought them off. But Sydney, she's injured." For one fractured second, silence rang in Flynn's head. Then his wolf surged, snarling, violent. He didn't ask questions, didn't wait for clarification, didn't care about the merchants or their gilded offers. Everything dissolved into nothing but one need: get home. He was running before his mind even caught up, abandoning his men where they stood. His muscles burned as he tore through the forest, branches snapping beneath his weight, the earth trembling under his stride. His wolf clawed at his chest, demanding release, demanding blood. Every heartbeat was a countdown, every breath seared with fury. He could feel her scent faintly on the wind, even miles away, fragile, bloodied, pulling him like a tether. And with each step, his wolf whispered one truth: "She's mine. Nobody hurts what's mine." The estate in ruins. The moment Ravenclaw estate came into view, Flynn felt the world narrow. Guards scrambled to clear a path, their heads bowed low as he stormed through the iron gates. None dared stop him. None dared speak. His dominance pressed down like a storm cloud, thick, suffocating, choking the very air. The scent hit him first. Blood. It lingered on the marble steps, in the broken glass glittering across the entryway, in the shredded velvet curtains billowing with the wind. His home, his sanctuary, bore the wounds of battle. Splintered doors leaned from their hinges, and silver candelabras lay toppled, their wax pooling uselessly onto blood-smeared floors. His chest constricted, fury roaring hotter with every detail, and then he saw her. Sydney. She lay sprawled on the velvet settee in the grand hall, fragile against the sea of destruction. Her chestnut hair tumbled in tangled waves, her skin pale as porcelain, streaked with dried blood and tears. A silk throw had been draped across her body, but it couldn't mask the sharp scent of her wound. Ariana sat close, dabbing Sydney's arm gently with a damp cloth. Her face was pale too, though her hands didn't falter. The blade that cut her was covered with poison. Nearby, Lucian stood like an iron statue, arms folded across his chest, his broad shoulders rigid. Rage carved deep lines into his features, but his eyes remained steady. Flynn froze in the doorway. For a single breath, all he could do was stare. His wolf howled inside him, clawing, shaking, nearly shattering his control. Then his fury ignited. "Fury who did this?" His voice was low, lethal, vibrating with restrained violence. It rolled through the hall like thunder, rattling the crystal chandelier above. Lucian's gaze met his, steady, unflinching, but grim. "The Smiths. They sent men into our house. They came for her." The words detonated in Flynn's skull. The Smiths, her family. His fists curled so tight his nails cut crescents into his palms, blood dripping from his own skin. His jaw clenched until pain shot through his temple. "My family," Sydney whispered hoarsely, half-conscious, her lips trembling as they parted. They want me gone." That was it. Flynn's dominance erupted like a tidal wave. The force of it slammed into every corner of the room, crushing the air from lungs. Guards stiffened and bent under the weight. Ariana's breath caught, her hand tightening on the cloth. Even Lucian narrowed his eyes as the sheer power threatened to fracture the walls. Flynn's wolf bared its fangs, vibrating inside him with one promise: destroy them. "No one," Flynn growled, his voice guttural, dangerous. "No one touches what is mine, not even family." He crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees beside Sydney. His large hands cupped her trembling fingers with impossible gentleness, as if afraid to break her. His wolf raged for violence, for vengeance, but Flynn held it back with sheer will. She needed him steady. She needed him here, and he would not fail her. Hours. Time blurred. The estate shifted around him. Guards dragging bodies out into the courtyard, servants sweeping broken glass, Lucian barking orders, Ariana whispering reassurances. But Flynn didn't move. He remained anchored at Sydney's side. He didn't eat. Didn't speak. Didn't even flinch when a medic stitched her wound with fine silver thread, murmuring that the blade had missed bone, and has given her some medicine to help with the poison. Flynn only sat there, a silent sentinel, his hand resting lightly on hers. His wolf snarled each time her breath hitched, each time she whimpered in her sleep. At one point, Ariana touched his shoulder, her voice soft. "You should rest, Flynn. We'll watch her." Flynn didn't turn his head. No. The single word was enough. Ariana said nothing more. Sydney's whisper. Near midnight, Sydney stirred. Her lashes fluttered, and a faint sound broke her lips. Flynn... His chest tightened as though speared. He leaned closer instantly. "I'm here." Her voice was barely audible, cracked and fragile. "Don't leave." His throat burned. "I won't. I'll never leave." Her eyes didn't open, but a single tear slid down her cheek. Flynn brushed it away with the pad of his thumb, his touch gentler than silk. His wolf whimpered inside him, torn between fury and devastation. "You'll never be alone again," he murmured, the vow shaping itself before he could stop it. The Alpha's vigil. The night stretched, long and endless. They carried Sydney upstairs to her chambers, an opulent room draped in soft white fabrics, a chandelier glittering faintly above, the faintest scent of roses lingering from the oils Ariana loved to use. Flynn followed closely, every step measured, every muscle coiled in readiness. When they laid Sydney in bed, he settled beside her. Not under the covers, never relaxed. He sat on the edge of the mattress, broad shoulders rigid, every sense sharpened. His wolf prowled restlessly beneath his skin, growling at every shift of shadow, every creak of the house. But whenever his gaze landed on her delicate frame curled beneath blankets of Italian silk, her breathing slow but steady, his fury softened into something else, something heavier, something terrifying in its own way. Love, the kind that consumed, the kind that burned. He stayed that way until dawn, his hand wrapped around hers, his eyes never closing. The world could burn, the Smiths could send 1,000 more assassins. He would tear them all apart, because Sydney was his, and no one, no family, no enemy, no fate, would ever try to take her from him again. Chapter 11. Sisters of Choice. The days after the attack passed in a blur, but for Sydney, they were unlike anything she'd ever known. Flynn refused to leave her side. His presence was constant, steady, unyielding, suffocating at times, but strangely comforting. He insisted on caring for her personally, as though entrusting anyone else would be negligence. He bathed her himself, his hands strong yet astonishingly gentle. Each movement was deliberate, his calloused fingers brushing over her skin like velvet, as though he feared she might shatter if he pressed too hard. He washed her hair, combed out the tangles with patient precision, and wrapped her in the softest cashmere robe imported from Milan. He fed her, too, lifting morsels of roasted salmon, fresh fruit, and soft pastries prepared by Ariana to her lips as though she were something precious. Sydney protested at first, cheeks warming in embarrassment at being cared for so openly, especially in front of Ariana and the household staff. But Flynn only silenced her with the calm command in his eyes. "You almost died," he murmured one evening, dipping the cloth into warm water as he dabbed gently at the last trace of her healing wound. The water steamed faintly in the crystal bowl, scented with lavender oil. "Forgive me if I refuse to take risks again." It wasn't the words that unsettled her, but the way he said them, with a protectiveness she had never felt from her own family. Not from Elias. Not from the Smiths. This was different. Ariana's observation. Ariana saw everything. She had watched Flynn grow from a stubborn, reckless boy into the alpha he was now. She had seen his temper flare, his defiance toward tradition, his unyielding pride. But never, never had she seen him like this. Calm, possessive, tender. The way his wolf stirred whenever Sydney winced, the way his eyes softened whenever Sydney smiled. It was a revelation. The alpha who could snap an enemy's spine with his bare hands was the same man holding Sydney's hand as though it were made of porcelain. That evening, when Sydney had finally drifted into a peaceful sleep under a blanket of Egyptian cotton sheets, Ariana found Lucien in the study. The room smelled of aged whiskey and cigar smoke. Lucien stood by the tall windows, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, always observing. "She's his mate," Ariana whispered, her voice barely above the crackle of the fireplace. Lucien didn't even turn to her. He merely sipped his wine from a baccarat crystal glass, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I knew the moment Elias stormed into our home," he said smoothly. The way Flynn stood before her, the way his wolf flared. It was written in his eyes. Ariana exhaled deeply, relief softening her features. "I worried that he would never find that piece of himself, that he'd always remain the reckless boy I raised." Lucien finally turned, his dark eyes warm with rare affection. "He has found it. Now our task is to shield them both, because make no mistake, the vultures of Lichen Ridge won't stop circling. The Silver Fangs will come again, this time with council law on their tongues." Ariana nodded, her heart heavy with understanding. But for the first time in years, she also felt peace. Her brother wasn't alone anymore, sisters by choice. The next morning, Ariana sought Sydney herself. She found her in the sunlit garden, seated beneath a marble archway surrounded by climbing roses. The air was sweet with jasmine. A porcelain tea set glimmered in the light, steam curling from Sydney's cup. Flynn hovered nearby like a sentinel, his broad frame casting a protective shadow across the terrace. Sydney was quiet, her delicate fingers tracing the rim of her teacup, her chestnut hair falling over her face. Her dress, a soft pastel Valentino, made her look fragile, ethereal, like porcelain about to crack. Ariana sat beside her and slipped her hand into Sydney's, giving it a firm squeeze. "You're family now," she said softly. "Not by law, not by pack ties, by choice, my choice." Sydney's eyes welled instantly. She had been cast aside by the Smiths, betrayed by Elias, nearly murdered by her so-called family. The word family was a wound. And yet, hearing it from Ariana's lips, she felt something break inside her, something painful and healing all at once. From that day forward, Ariana treated her not like a guest of the Ravenclaws, but like a sister. Days of laughter, their days filled with laughter, something Sydney had thought she'd never find again. Ariana swept her into the vibrant heart of Lichen Ridge, insisting she deserved the best. The first trip was to the Grand Lichen Ridge Mall, a sprawling complex of glass and steel that gleamed like a palace. The polished marble floors reflected the chandeliers overhead, while designer boutiques lined the halls. Dior, Chanel, Gucci, Fendi, each a temple of opulence. Ariana's mere presence drew eyes. The Ravenclaw name carried weight, and Sydney felt the stares, the whispers as they entered Dior's flagship boutique. Flynn followed silently behind, tall and forbidding, arms crossed like a sentinel. "Pick what you want," Ariana said with a mischievous smile, holding up a Dior lady bag encrusted with Swarovski crystals. "If Flynn frowns at the bill, tell him I insisted." Sydney laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. They tried on gowns of silk and satin pastel sundresses that hugged Sydney's figure, perfectly delicate jewelry that sparkled beneath the chandelier lights. Ariana made her twirl before mirrors, showering her with praise. Flynn said nothing, but his sharp eyes softened every time Sydney smiled. Another day, Ariana took her to Lichen Ridge's famed museum. The building itself was a marvel of stone and glass, housing relics of old bloodlines and artifacts that whispered, of ancient battles and forgotten histories of Sintra. Meeting the scholars, it was there Sydney met them. Tessa Lennox, fierce, striking, with midnight dark hair pulled into a sleek braid and intelligent eyes that seemed to pierce through skin and soul alike. She wore simple black attire, slim trousers and a silk blouse, yet there was an elegance about her that commanded attention. Beside her stood Blake Archer, broad-shouldered, sharply handsome, his posture easy but his gaze sharp with intellect. He wore a tailored navy suit, no tie, the casual elegance of a man who knew power without needing to flaunt it. "Sydney, meet Tessa Lennox and Blake Archer," Ariana said warmly, "the two most brilliant archaeologists in Lichen Ridge." Tessa inclined her head slightly, her lips curving with something between curiosity and challenge. "So, this is the girl who has the entire Silverfang pack rattled." Sydney flushed, uncomfortable under her intense gaze. Blake, however, smiled gently. "Don't mind her. Tessa has a sharp tongue, but sharper wit. Come, we'll show you something." They guided Sydney and Ariana through the museum's hidden corridors, pointing out relics unearthed from forgotten territories, daggers engraved with runes, scrolls preserved in glass, portraits of wolves long gone. "These are not just stories," Blake explained, pausing before a tapestry of an ancient pack crest. "Bloodlines run deeper than law or name. They tell us who we are, and who we might become." Sydney's chest tightened at his words. Adopted. Betrayed. Rootless. Who was she, truly? Tessa studied her for a long moment, then said bluntly, "If the Smiths adopted you, then somewhere there's a truth they wanted buried. Find it." Ariana placed a supportive hand on Sydney's shoulder. "That's exactly why we're here. Your past doesn't end with betrayal. It begins with discovery." Sydney swallowed hard, her mind spinning. She had lost her family, but perhaps there was more to find. Something that was hers alone. A quiet night. That evening, back at the estate, Sydney sat before the grand windows of Flynn's suite. The velvet curtains were drawn halfway, and outside the gardens glowed with lantern light, soft and golden against the night. She wore a pale silk slip, a gift Ariana had pressed into her hands earlier. Her bare feet curled into the plush Persian rug, but her thoughts were far away. Flynn entered quietly, his frame filling the doorway. He loosened his tie, the charcoal Tom Ford suit still clinging perfectly to his body. He paused, watching her with his usual steady gaze. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice low. He approached, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "Do you ever wonder who I really am?" Sydney asked softly, her eyes still on the lantern-lit garden. Flynn stopped, his jaw tightening. He wanted to tell her she was his mate, that nothing else mattered. But instead, he sat beside her, his presence heavy and grounding. "You're Sydney," he said simply. "And that is enough for me." Her heart ached at his words, warmth spreading through her chest. But deep down, she knew Ariana and the archaeologists were right. Somewhere in her blood, in her bones, there was a truth waiting to be unearthed. And she would find it. Chapter 12. The Hidden Papers. The day Ariana suggested they go into the Lichen Ridge archives, Sydney thought it would just be another distraction. Another one of Ariana's clever ways to keep her mind busy, far away from Elias, from the Smiths, from the bloody memory of that night when assassins had come for her. But Ariana's eyes had been sharp, her tone insistent. "Sydney, I want you to see something for yourself. If the Smiths adopted you, there will be a record. The truth doesn't vanish, it just gets buried." There was no arguing with Ariana when she used that tone. She was calm but immovable, her presence commanding without needing to raise her voice. Sydney knew then that Ariana wasn't just offering her a distraction. She was leading her toward something she had been avoiding her whole life. Answers. That was how Sydney found herself standing before the iron gates of Lichen Ridge's high archives. The building loomed like a fortress, its stone walls carved with history itself. Every great family that had ever held power in Lichen Ridge had their sigils etched into the walls. Stormbane, Blackthorn, Ashlaw, Cruz, DeLuca, Ironfang, Ravenclaw. Each was gilded in silver or gold, polished as though their legacies would never fade. But one name, etched in deep scarlet stone, stood out among the rest: Redwood. Sydney didn't know why her chest tightened at that name, but it did, as if the very sight of it plucked a hidden chord inside her soul. Inside the archives, the heavy doors creaked open, revealing an interior that smelled of dust, parchment, and ink. Long corridors stretched endlessly, lined with shelves stacked high with leather-bound records. Golden lamps glowed softly, casting halos of light on polished oak tables where clerks scribbled furiously into ledgers. Guards in navy uniforms patrolled silently, their boots clicking against the marble floor. It was a place where secrets lived in silence. Ariana moved through it like she owned it. Regal in a cream Chanel suit with sharp tailoring, pearls around her neck, and her Ravenclaw crest pinned neatly to her lapel. She was untouchable. Every worker who glanced up froze in recognition. No one dared question her as she led Sydney deeper into the labyrinth of records. A clerk hurried forward, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the polished desk. He extended a ring of brass keys with trembling hands. "My Lady Ravenclaw," he said, voice hushed with reverence. Ariana accepted it without breaking stride. "Come, Sydney," she murmured, guiding her into a locked chamber at the far end of the corridor. The air inside was colder, stale from centuries of paper stacked floor to ceiling. Rows of cabinets towered over them, drawers labeled in faded script. Ariana's fingers moved with precision, pulling drawers open, shuffling through yellowing papers. Her movements were sharp, deliberate, as though she already knew what she was looking for. Then, suddenly, her hands stilled. Her blue eyes softened. "Sydney, come here. The truth in ink." Sydney's hands trembled as she stepped forward. Ariana held out a folder bound in brittle parchment. The ink was faded, but the words burned into Sydney's vision as if they had been etched with fire. "Adoption record. Sydney Redwood." Her heart stopped. The surname looked wrong, alien. Yet, somehow, it fit more than Smith ever had. Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes scanned the page, faster and faster, her vision blurring as she read. Mother's name, Maya Redwood. Status, deceased. Cause, complication during childbirth. Father, unlisted. Adoption granted to Christopher Smith and Celine Smith. A sob tore from Sydney's throat before she even realized it. The paper crumpled in her trembling hands. She staggered back, clutching the record as though it were poison. I was never really a Smith, the truth. Seeing it boldly now hurts Ariana?" she whispered, voice breaking under the weight of it. Ariana was beside her instantly, arms strong and warm, pulling Sydney into a protective embrace. "No, sweetheart, you were never theirs. You belonged to someone else long before they claimed you." Tears spilled freely down Sydney's cheeks, her chest heaved, every breath sharp and painful. "But the Smiths, my whole life, they made me believe I was nothing but a placeholder. All this time they knew, and decided to dump me at the wedding to crown their daughter. I tried to make myself believe it wasn't true, but the assassination and everything, it's clear now. They knew, and they seemed to be hiding something too," Ariana said, her own voice trembling, with anger she rarely allowed to show. Her nails dug into Sydney's shoulder protectively. They did it because power mattered more to them than truth. Maya Redwood. They sat in silence for a long time on the cold archive floor, the record spread between them. Sydney's fingers traced her birth mother's name again and again, as though the ink itself might give her strength. Maya Redwood. The name was both a comfort and a knife. "Who are the Redwoods?" Sydney finally asked, her voice a whisper, hoarse from crying. Ariana's expression softened with recognition. One of the old houses, protectors of the forest, fierce, noble. They had a reputation for keeping balance, for defending lands most others ignored. But they were quiet people, not interested in the endless politics of Lichen Ridge. "What happened to them?" Sydney asked, barely able to breathe the words. "They dwindled," Ariana said gently, brushing a strand of chestnut hair behind Sydney's ear. "When Maya died, the redwoods were devastated. Her daughter lost. Or so everyone believed." Her voice lowered, carrying the weight of revelation. "Until now." The words struck deep. Sydney wasn't just a discarded daughter. She wasn't a Silverfang pawn. She was Redwood, born of a family who refrained from the stage of power, a family no one could destroy. And now she was the one of them. The return to Ravenclaw. When they left the archives, Sydney felt both free and utterly lost. Free from the Smiths, because their betrayal no longer defined her. But lost, because the roots she thought she had were nothing but lies. She barely remembered the ride back to Ravenclaw Estate. The seats were upholstered in deep burgundy leather, but Sydney didn't notice any of it. Ariana sat quietly beside her, her hand occasionally brushing Sydney's in reassurance, never pressing, just steady. But Sydney could feel Flynn even from a distance. His energy pulled at her like gravity, reminding her of safety, of belonging. The car stopped in the courtyard of the Ravenclaw estate. Flynn was already there, waiting. Dressed in a tailored black Brioni suit, his silver eyes locked onto Sydney instantly. He moved down the stone steps with predatory grace, crossing the courtyard in 3 long strides. "What happened?" His voice was sharp, protective, almost feral. Ariana lifted her hand calmly. "Not now, Flynn. She needs to breathe." But Sydney clutched the folder against her chest, her glassy eyes lifting to meet his. Her lips trembled as the words fell out. "My suspicions are true. I was never a truly Silverfang," she whispered. I was Redwood." The name hit Flynn like a strike. His jaw clenched, his wolf bristling beneath the surface. But he didn't hesitate. He reached for her, pulling her tightly into his chest. Sydney didn't fight it. She buried herself against him, inhaling his warmth, shaking as though the world had just collapsed beneath her feet. "You are Sydney," Flynn said fiercely, his voice rumbling low against her ear. "And no matter what name you carried then, you're mine now. No one will take that from you." For a moment, Sydney let herself believe him. She let the Redwood name settle in her heart, fragile and uncertain. A piece of her had broken forever, but another piece, small, trembling, alive, had begun to bloom. A sleepless night. That night, Sydney couldn't sleep. She sat curled in the velvet chair by the window of her chamber. Beyond the glass, the forest stretched endlessly, the treetops swaying in the wind. The lanterns from the garden below glowed faintly, casting shadows that danced across her silk nightgown. The trees seemed alive, whispering secrets of roots, blood, and earth. She wondered if her mother had walked among them once. If Maya Redwood had felt the same pull, the same unspoken bond with the woods that tugged at Sydney now. The adoption papers were spread out around her, fragile pages scattered across the Persian rug. Her fingers traced Maya's name over and over, as though memorizing it would anchor her. A knock sounded softly at the door. Ariana entered without waiting, wrapped in a long cashmere robe, her raven dark hair tumbling down her shoulders. She took in the sight silently. Sydney, fragile and lost, surrounded by the proof of her shattered past. Ariana didn't scold her. She didn't tell her rest. She simply crossed the room, sat beside her, and placed a warm hand over Sydney's trembling one. "You're not lost, Sydney," Ariana said softly. "You've just been given the chance to discover who you truly are, and I'll be with you every step of the way." Sydney's throat tightened. For the first time, she believed her. She wasn't a Smith. She wasn't Silverfang property. She was Redwood. and though the truth had shattered her, it had also set her free. Chapter 13. The Shadow of Elias. The morning had begun with laughter. The air outside Ravenclaw Estate was crisp, carrying the cool bite of dew and the earthy scent of the forest. The cobblestone paths shimmered faintly from the early mist, weaving through carefully curated gardens where roses, black tulips, and night-blooming jasmine spilled their fragrance into the early light. Sculpted marble fountains murmured softly, their waters catching flecks of gold as the sun crept above the tree line. Flynn had insisted on their walk. His hand brushed against Sydney's every now and then, not quite holding but always there, as if reassuring himself that she was real, that she was still with him. He moved with a kind of self-possession that made others pause, his tailored black coat draping perfectly over his broad frame. But beside Sydney, he seemed lighter. "So," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on her face, "how deep are you with the papers you found?" "Well," Sydney replied, her voice soft but steady, "I wanted to believe I was Silverfang, but now I've settled with Redwood." Flynn stopped in his tracks. His boots ground against the stone path as he turned to her fully. His expression was unreadable at first, silver eyes flickering as though the words carried a weight he had expected yet dreaded to hear. For a long moment, silence lingered, broken only by the distant coo of doves nesting in the garden arches. Then his lips curved, faint but certain. "I'm happy for you, but I kind of always knew it," he said. She blinked, stunned. "You knew?" "Not with proof." He tilted his head, the faintest of smirks tugging at his lips. "But nothing about you ever belonged to them. You've always been more than what they tried to make you believe." Heat touched Sydney's cheeks. She wanted to look away, to hide the sudden warmth that bloomed in her chest, but she couldn't. Flynn's gaze had a way of pinning her in place, of stripping her down to truths she hadn't dared face herself. Before she could answer, his attention shifted. He glanced toward the cluster of stone buildings near the estate gates. His voice was lighter now, a playful undercurrent threading through it. "Come," he said. "There's a coffee shop nearby. Best dark roast in Lichen Ridge. I'll grab us something." Sydney arched a brow, amused. The Alpha of Ravenclaw cares about street-side coffee? He allowed himself a soft chuckle. Even Alphas need street fuel. The coffee shop. The shop was tucked at the corner of the main road, a charming little place with a wrought iron sign that read Café Ardent. Its tall windows spilled golden light across the cobbled street. Inside, polished wood tables gleamed, each adorned with fresh-cut flowers in slim crystal vases. The aroma of roasted beans and warm pastries enveloped Sydney the moment they stepped in. Flynn told her to wait by the door while he placed the order. He moved with a quiet authority even here, but Sydney caught the faintest trace of boyish ease in the way he leaned against the counter, speaking low to the barista. She leaned against a carved wooden post, her fingers brushing the smooth grain. The murmur of voices, the clink of porcelain cups, the faint hum of a jazz tune playing from a vintage record player. It all felt startlingly normal. For the first time in weeks, Sydney felt almost ordinary. She hummed softly to herself, her chest loosening. But when Flynn turned back with 2 steaming cups in hand, Sydney was gone. The abduction, the porcelain cup in his left hand, slipped, shattering against the ground. Black coffee seeped into the cracks of the stone like spreading ink. Flynn's blue eyes snapped wide. His wolf surged beneath his skin like a storm, his aura crackling so violently that the cafe walls seemed to shiver. "Sydney!" His roar ripped through the street, rattling window panes, sending the few pedestrians scattering in terror. And then he smelled it, the thick, arrogant scent of Silverfang. Sydney's world spun as rough hands dragged her into the shadow of a narrow alley. Stone walls scraped against her shoulder as she struggled, nails clawing, voice breaking against the iron grip around her arm. "Let me go!" she screamed. But the voice that answered froze her blood. "You should have been mine all along, Elias," He stepped into view, broad-shouldered, towering, his dark hair slicked back in deliberate perfection. His golden eyes burned with triumph, and the expensive black suit he wore clung to him like armor. He looked like power incarnate, but his aura reeked of cruelty. Behind him, 2 heavy bodyguards flanked her, blocking every exit. Their tailored suits did little to soften the menace radiating from their hulking frames. "You don't belong in Ravenclaw," Elias hissed, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You were meant for me. You always were." Her chest tightened, fury flaring so hot it burned through the fear. "Meant for you? You betrayed me, Elias, on my wedding day, with my sister, for heaven's sake." For the briefest second his expression flickered, shame, annoyance, perhaps even regret. But it vanished instantly, replaced by cold, unyielding certainty. "That doesn't matter now. What matters is this." And before Sydney could react, Elias seized her shoulder, yanked her close, and sank his teeth into her neck. The bite, the pain was white-hot, blinding. Sydney's scream tore through the air, echoing off the stone walls. It felt as though fire had erupted beneath her skin, searing through her veins. Her knees buckled, blood spilling hot down her collarbone, staining the delicate ivory of her blouse. The crowd that had gathered at the mouth of the alley gasped. Shock rippled through the bystanders, whispers rising like a tide. "He's claiming her. That's Ravenclaw Alpha's woman. She's human. Can she even survive it? I don't think she's his mate." Elias pulled back, lips crimson, satisfaction gleaming in his golden eyes. He raised Sydney's trembling body before the crowd like a trophy. "She was always mine," he declared, his voice booming, sharp with arrogance. "Flynn Ravenclaw trespassed on Darkmoor grounds, broke pack law, and abducted her on her wedding day. But now she is marked. Now she belongs where she was meant to be." The bite throbbed at Sydney's neck, her pulse stuttering. She could barely breathe. Every nerve in her body screamed, the weight of his words crushing her. She wasn't a wolf. She wasn't marked by Flynn, and Elias was using that against her. "Stop," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "You're killing me." And then she heard it, a hushed voice from a woman in the crowd. "If she isn't marked by her true mate soon, she won't survive. Her humanity will break under it." The words were like a blade straight to Sydney's chest. Her eyes widened in horror. She hadn't understood, not fully, what it meant to be unclaimed, but now she realized she had only one chance at survival. The storm. Flynn arrived like a storm. His presence tore through the crowd before his voice did. "Elias!" The name was thunder. The people scattered as Flynn's power surged outward, a violent wave of alpha dominance that pressed against every chest, made every breath falter. His ocean eyes glowed with fury, his wolf barely restrained beneath his skin. His chest rose and fell like a man tethered to violence by the thinnest of threads. The ground seemed to shake with each step he took forward. Elias only smirked, tightening his grip on Sydney, his hand pressing cruelly against her wound. "You're too late, Ravenclaw," he taunted. "She's mine now," claimed. Flynn's jaw clenched, his claws threatening to tear through his skin. But his eyes were locked on Sydney. Her trembling frame, her blood, her pain, her desperate pleading gaze. She mouthed one word, "Help," and Flynn understood. With a growl that rattled windows, Flynn stepped forward. His voice was low, lethal. "You'll regret touching her, Elias. Mark or no mark, you will regret it." The standoff had begun. Chapter 14. The Wolf Unleashed. The street of Lichen Ridge was alive one moment and silent the next. The usual bustle of merchants, velvet-draped stalls, and citizens, some walking to school, others walking to or back from work, had dissolved into a wide circle of onlookers. Now, no one dared to breathe. They stood frozen, eyes darting between the two alphas who faced each other like gods of war, Flynn Ravenclaw and Elias Silverfang. Sydney sagged in Elias's grip, her slender frame trembling as blood dripped down her neck. His brutal bite throbbed like a brand, the wound searing her humanity away piece by piece. Her chest rose in shallow pulls of air, her glassy eyes glazed with pain. Flynn's silver gaze locked on her first, softening for the briefest second, before snapping back to Elias with a fury that could turn mountains to dust. His wolf paced beneath his skin, snarling, demanding to be unleashed. The leash he had held on it all this time was gone. Let her go. Flynn's voice rolled across the square, deep and thunderous, a command that made even seasoned warriors in the crowd stiffen. Elias smirked. His tailored black jacket gleamed faintly, custom-stitched with gold embroidery at the cuffs, expensive, deliberate arrogance. His golden eyes glittered like a predator savoring the kill. "She's mine now," Elias said, his voice carrying with the cruel ease of entitlement. "Claimed before the entire ridge. And you, Ravenclaw, you broke law the moment you stepped on Darkmoor soil. You have no right to her." Flynn's jaw clenched, his teeth baring, every muscle in his frame taut as steel. His tailored charcoal shirt strained against his chest, the fabric whispering of Italian luxury. But none of it mattered now. His hands flexed, claws threatening to break through, his body trembling with restraint. From across the square he could feel it, Sydney's heartbeat faltering. The wolf within him snapped. A snarl ripped from his chest, primal and raw, silencing the entire market. Then, with a violent shudder, Flynn's body broke into his wolf. White fur erupted like lightning, bones and muscle shifting with a sound that cracked through the air. When the transformation ended, the blue-eyed, white-furred alpha wolf of Ravenclaw stood in full glory, towering, terrifying, unleashed. His fur gleamed like snow under moonlight, his presence a weapon in itself. The very ground trembled beneath the weight of his rage. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Ravenclaw alpha, white as death. "Elias doesn't stand a chance." Elias shoved Sydney roughly to the ground, her fragile body crumpling against the cobblestones. Blood smeared across her pale skin, her hand instinctively trying to cover the wound. Flynn's wolf snarled, fur bristling, silver eyes burning with the promise of carnage. Then Elias shifted. His golden brown wolf burst into existence, broad and muscled, larger than most, his growl reverberating like an earthquake. His fangs gleamed in the light, dripping with hunger, his golden eyes still alight even in beast form. His wolf radiated arrogance, a brute strength sharpened by cruelty. For a heartbeat, silence. And then, chaos, the fight. The wolves collided with an impact that rattled windows, sending crates and market stalls crashing to the ground. Dust exploded upward, filling the air with grit as claws slashed, teeth snapped, and snarls echoed like thunder. Flynn drove Elias back with sheer ferocity, his white form a blur of speed. His claws ripped across Elias's flank, drawing a deep line of crimson. Elias roared and countered, lunging with terrifying weight, his fangs sinking into Flynn's shoulder. Blood spattered across the cobblestones, hot and metallic. But Flynn didn't falter. He spun, his movements precise, and raked his claws down Elias's side, tearing through fur and flesh alike. Elias howled, thrashing, his golden eyes blazing with fury. He snapped his jaws toward Flynn's throat, aiming for a killing blow, but Flynn ducked low, his claws slicing upward in a devastating arc. The crowd staggered back. Some screamed, some whispered frantic prayers. Others shouted encouragement, their voices rising above the clash of claws and bone. The street had become an arena, and every soul present knew they were witnessing history. Flynn's wolf fought with lethal precision. Every strike carried purpose, every movement sharpened by years of discipline and by the sight of Sydney bleeding on the ground. Each lunge was fueled by the raw terror of losing her. Elias, though, was relentless. His wolf was heavier, built for brute force, and he used it savagely. He lunged again and again, claws tearing chunks of stone from the ground as he tried to overpower Flynn with sheer bulk. Flynn dodged, slashed, countered. Blood-streaked white fur crimson against ivory, but he did not yield. Elias leapt high, his massive form arcing through the dust-filled air. His shadow loomed like a falling mountain, his jaws wide, teeth gleaming as he aimed to crush Flynn beneath him. But Flynn surged upward to meet him. Mid-air, their bodies collided with bone-crushing force. Flynn's jaws snapped shut around Elias's throat. The sound was sickening, a crunch, a tear. Elias's roar turned into a strangled, gurgling howl. Blood sprayed across the cobblestones. Elias thrashed violently, his claws raking Flynn's sides, but Flynn's grip was merciless. His blue eyes burned, his fangs locked deep. With one brutal wrench of his neck, Flynn ripped Elias downward, slamming his body against the ground so hard the earth itself seemed to crack. The street went silent. Elias's golden eyes went wide. Shock flickered, then faded as his body stilled. Flynn's wolf tore through him one final time, white fur stained crimson, fangs gleaming with vengeance. Elias Silverfang lay dead. The aftermath. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was Flynn's ragged breathing, the drip of blood hitting stone. Then the crowd erupted. Cheers, gasps, shouts of his name, Ravenclaw's name, filled the street. The usurper was dead. The Silverfang legacy had been shattered. Flynn Ravenclaw stood victorious, his wolf gleaming white beneath the blood of his rival. But Flynn didn't hear them. His wolf turned slowly, blue gaze falling on Sydney. She was slumped against the cobblestones, her hand weakly pressed against the wound on her neck. Her chest rose faintly, too faintly, her lips pale, trembling, her eyes half closed as though slipping away. A sound tore from Flynn's wolf, raw, guttural, heart-wrenching. Something almost human. He shifted back. Bones snapped, muscles twisted, and in a heartbeat he was on his knees, his bare skin streaked with blood, his chest rising and falling like a man broken. Sydney, his voice cracked as he gathered her gently into his arms. Her body was fragile, cold, her skin clammy against his warmth. He pulled her close, pressing her against his bloodied chest. "Stay with me, please. Stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered, heavy. "Flynn," she whispered, so faint it was nearly lost in the roar of the crowd. "It hurts." Flynn's hands trembled as he brushed her hair back from her face. His heart slammed against his ribs, fear clawing through him like nothing he had ever known. "I'm here. I'll fix this. I swear I'll never let you go." Tears blurred his vision. For the first time since he was a boy, Flynn Ravenclaw felt true fear. Not of death, not of battle, but of losing her. He pressed his forehead against hers, his voice hoarse, desperate. "You're my mate, Sydney. Mine. You've always been mine. And I won't let anyone take you from me. Not Elias, not the council, not fate itself." Her body shuddered in his arms, breath shallow, fading too quickly, and Flynn knew. If he didn't act, if he didn't claim her now, he would lose her forever. Chapter 15. The Mate's Claim. The street of Lichen Ridge was still ringing with the echoes of Elias Silverfang's death. His body lay motionless on the cobblestones, sprawled in a heap where Flynn had left him. The once proud Alpha, dressed in the remnants of his bespoke wool coat lined with golden threading, was now nothing more than a broken carcass. Blood trickled into the cracks between the stones, weaving a crimson trail that crept across the polished black granite tiles that had been imported from Milan centuries ago. The metallic scent hung thick in the air, mingling with the faint perfumes of overturned merchant stalls, rose oil, cardamom spice, leather. But Flynn's focus wasn't on the corpse, it was on Sydney. She lay cradled in his arms, her body frighteningly still. Her chest rose in the barest of movements, shallow and weak. The wound at her neck burned, the jagged mark Elias had forced into her flesh still glowing faintly as if it pulsed with poison, like fire eating her from within. Her skin was pale, too pale, her lips trembling, parted as if searching for air. "Sydney." Flynn's voice cracked. His thumb brushed her cheek, desperate, frantic, refusing to accept the sight before him. "Stay with me. Please. You don't get to leave me now." Her eyelids fluttered, lashes trembling like fragile silk. Her lips moved, her voice faint as a dying flame. "Flynn, I can't." He shook his head violently, clutching her tighter, as if sheer will could keep her tethered to him. His body trembled, his wolf howled inside, savage and unrelenting, demanding he act before it was too late. "Don't you say that. Don't you dare," Flynn growled, his voice shaking with desperation. "I fought wars for less than you, bled more than this, killed for you. You are not leaving me, Sydney. You are mine." The words tore out of him again, unguarded, unstoppable. Words he had buried, hidden, convinced himself he could protect her better if he kept them locked away. But now, with her slipping through his arms, there was no more time. "You're my mate." The declaration wasn't shouted, it wasn't grand, it was hoarse, broken, soaked in fear, yet it carried across the square like thunder, silencing the crowd in a single heartbeat. The murmurs of citizens, the gasps of nobles, even the quiet sobs of children and roars of cars, it all stilled. Flynn pressed his forehead to hers, his blood dripping onto her skin, mingling with hers as if even their wounds refused to be apart. "I should have told you the first moment I knew," he whispered, his voice raw with regret. "The night I carried you from that cursed wedding, I felt it. My wolf felt it. You are mine, Sydney. You've always been mine. And I'm yours." Her hand twitched weakly against his chest, her eyes flickering with faint recognition. But the light inside her was dimming, slipping further away. Panic ripped through him, black and sharp. His chest heaved as his wolf surged forward, clawing, snarling, demanding action. Flynn lowered his lips to her neck, his breath ragged against her skin. "This is going to hurt," he whispered, his voice breaking as his throat tightened. "But it will save you. I swear it." And then he sank his teeth into her flesh. The claim. The moment his fangs pierced her skin, the world shattered. Her body convulsed violently in his arms, a strangled gasp ripping from her throat. Blood spilled hot and thick against his lips, metallic and burning, but he didn't let go. His wolf surged into her with the mark, pouring everything into it. His dominance, his vow, his forever. For a heartbeat there was nothing. And then a shockwave tore through them both. The air split open, a current of fire and lightning surging through their veins. Sydney jolted in his arms, her eyes flying wide, a scream ripping from her lungs. It wasn't pain, it was release. A soul breaking free of chains it never knew it carried. Her pulse, faint moments ago, roared back to life. Her heart pounded strong, echoing against Flynn's lips. Her chest heaved, breath rushing in fast, desperate gulps. Color flushed back into her cheeks, warmth flooding her skin as Elias's claim faded. Flynn felt it too, the bond snapping into place with brutal force, searing through him. His wolf howled inside him, triumphant, complete at last. Sydney gasped, her hands clawing weakly at his shoulders as the bond tethered them. For the first time she felt it, the thread tying her heart to his, her pulse syncing with his, her breath catching in rhythm with his own. A connection so deep, so absolute, it felt carved into their very bones. When Flynn finally pulled his fangs free, his lips stained with her blood, he pressed his forehead against hers again. His breath came hard, ragged, but his voice was steady now, strong even as it broke. "You're mine, Sydney. No one will ever take you from me again." Her lips trembled, her voice, faint but sure, slipped between them. I feel it. Flynn, Her lashes fluttered, Her body trembled, but her eyes met his. "You're my mate." The words broke him. He kissed her fiercely, desperately, their tears and blood mingling. It wasn't gentle. It was survival. It was possession. It was love laid bare, brutal and unshaken. When they finally parted, Sydney was still trembling, her breaths shallow. But she was alive. Alive because of him. Alive because of their bond. The witnesses. The world intruded. The roar and humming of cars surrounded them instantly as Ariana and Lucian stormed into view. Ariana's gown of black silk trailed behind her, the crimson embroidery glinting in the sunlight, her face pale as she took in the sight before her. Her hand flew to her mouth. Lucian's eyes swept the scene coldly. Elias's lifeless body sprawled on the cobblestones, the blood still glistening on Flynn's skin. Sydney trembling in his arms, her neck now bearing not one, but 2 marks. The faint scar of Elias's forced claim, and Flynn's glowing bond seared into her flesh like fire. Behind them, boots shuffled in sharp rhythm. The council had arrived. Their long embroidered cloaks trailed like shadows, golden seals of office pinned against deep velvet. Their polished shoes clicked against the stone as they entered, forming a line of judgment. Their eyes swept the street, taking in Elias's corpse, the wreckage, the crowd. And finally, Flynn, kneeling in blood, Sydney in his arms. The air grew thick, tense, suffocating. One councilman stepped forward, his voice sharp and commanding. "Flynn, Alpha of Ravenclaw." "Explain yourself." Flynn lifted his head slowly. His blue eyes glowed, dangerous, dominance radiating off him in waves so strong even seasoned guards shifted uneasily. He didn't flinch. He didn't bow. He held Sydney closer, his arm tightening around her waist as if daring anyone to touch her. "There is nothing to explain," Flynn said, his voice deep, smooth, but laced with lethal steel. "She is mine. She has always been mine. Elias is dead because he tried to take what was never his." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers surged like wildfire, carried on the summer breeze. The councilmen's faces remained unreadable, but their eyes kept darting to Sydney, to the fresh mark on her neck, undeniable proof of what had been sealed. Ariana stepped forward, her voice sharp as a blade, cutting through the silence. "You all saw what happened. Elias forced himself on her. Flynn claimed her to save her life. If the council has any sense, you'll know this is no crime." Lucian's gaze swept across the officials, cold and unyielding. "Unless one of you wants to challenge Ravenclaw right here, in front of the ridge, I suggest you remember who holds power now." The tension was suffocating. The council glanced at one another, their cloaks swaying with unease. Flynn's dominance pressed down on them like a storm. The blood on the cobblestones testified. The corpse of Elias Silverfang testified. And Sydney's mark, fresh, irrefutable, testified. Finally, one of them cleared his throat. "We will review the matter, but for now the council will not interfere." Flynn's lip curled somewhere between a snarl and a smile. "Good, because if you try, I'll remind you what happens when someone threatens what's mine." And with that, he stood. His bloodied arms held Sydney close to his chest, bridal style, her cheek pressed against him. Her breaths came steady now, though faint. The mark fresh against her skin, a symbol of permanence that no law, no family, no council could strip away. The councilmen fell back, silent. The crowd parted, whispers rising in awe and fear as Flynn, the Alpha of Ravenclaw, carried her from the square. Ariana followed, her silks whispering across the blood-stained stones. Lucian's steps echoed beside them, his presence sharp, protective, lethal. The street behind them remained hushed, as though the very stones knew they had witnessed something ancient, something unbreakable. For the first time Sydney felt it. Not just the bond, but the certainty. No council, no pack, no law could sever it. She was his mate, and he was hers, forever. Chapter 16. Luna of Ravenclaw. The Awakening. The first thing Sydney felt when she awoke was warmth. Not the burning ache of Elias's poisoned mark. Not the bone-deep cold of death clawing at her soul. But real warmth. Safe warmth. She stirred slowly, her lashes heavy, the faint light of dawn filtering through silk-draped curtains above. Beneath her cheek was the steady thud of a heartbeat, strong and unwavering, as though the universe had tethered her life to that sound alone. When her eyes fluttered open, she saw him, Flynn Fisher. His silver eyes were fixed on her, ringed in red as though he hadn't closed them once since the battle. He looked haunted, torn apart by what he had nearly lost. But when she moved, when her breath brushed his skin, something in his gaze softened. "You're awake," he whispered, his voice breaking, the two words trembling with more emotion than Sydney had ever heard from him. Her lips parted. Her throat was dry, cracked with weakness, but one name still slipped out. Flynn. His hand shook as he brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek, his thumb lingering as though afraid she might vanish if he let go. "You almost left me." Her chest ached at the rawness in his tone. She could feel it, their bond alive and burning through her veins, the mark at her neck humming with heat. Each beat of his heart echoed inside her, each breath tethered them closer. "But I'm here," she whispered, her voice thin but steady. Flynn exhaled, leaning his forehead against hers, his whole body trembling with the storm still raging inside him. "And you'll never leave again." For a long moment, they stayed like that. No words, no movement, just breathing each other in, clinging to the bond that refused to let go, the Council's judgment. But peace in Lichen Ridge was always short-lived. By midday, the summons arrived. The Council convened in the Grand Hall of Ravenclaw Estate, a towering chamber carved in black stone, chandeliers dripping with gold and crystal, long velvet banners trailing down from the rafters embroidered with the ridge's sigils. The air was thick with incense and judgment, the whispers of onlookers echoing like an ominous chorus. At the head of the chamber, the councilmen sat in their raised seats, cloaked in velvet and fur, golden seals pinned at their throats. Their expressions were carved in stone as their eyes swept over Flynn and Sydney. Flynn stood tall, his dominance filling the chamber with invisible weight. He wore a sharp, black-tailored suit, Tom Ford, cut perfectly across his broad shoulders, the silver tie pinned with a Ravenclaw crest. Sydney stood at his side, wrapped in a deep emerald silk gown Ariana had pulled from her private collection, its fitted bodice and flowing skirts making her look every inch the Luna she was becoming. Her hand trembled slightly in his, but Flynn's grip never faltered. The leader of the council rose, his voice echoing. "Flynn, Alpha of Ravenclaw, you stand accused of slaying Elias Darkmoor, former Alpha of Silverfang, and of claiming his betrothed without council blessing. Do you wish to speak before judgment is passed?" The gallery stirred, the accusations ringing heavy in the air. Flynn's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his presence dominating the room. "Elias was no Alpha," he said, his voice cold steel. "He was a coward who betrayed the Smiths and abandoned them for the Silverfang title the moment they weakened. Worse, he was a predator. He was betrothed to Sydney, but ended up with the younger sister, who he thought wasn't enough. So he came back and forced his bite on Sydney against her will, and it was killing her. I stopped him. I saved her because she's my mate. I can't watch her die. That is not crime. That is justice." Gasps rippled through the audience. Sydney's chest swelled. His words were sharp, commanding, but there was truth in every syllable. Another councilman leaned forward, eyes sharp. And yet Elias was of the Silverfang bloodline. His death leaves a void. The Silverfangs demand retribution. Flynn's silver eyes blazed. The Silverfangs brought ruin upon themselves. Their Alpha was corrupt. If they wish to fill their void, they must look within their own house, not to mine. Murmurs erupted across the gallery. The air was charged, dangerous. Sydney's pulse quickened. If the council refused to recognize their bond, she knew they could take her away. She gripped Flynn's hand tighter, silently begging him not to lose control. And then Ariana rose. She cut through the tension like a blade, her raven dark hair gleaming under the chandeliers, her sapphire gown shimmering as she stepped forward. "The council speaks of law," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "Then let us speak of truth. Sydney was never Silverfang by right. The city archives have revealed her adoption. She was born Redwood. She belongs to an older bloodline, one the council itself has recognized for centuries. And now she bears Ravenclaw's mark. If you deny her, you deny your own laws." Gasps thundered through the chamber. Redwood, a name of weight, guardians of the ancient forests, protectors of lands older than the ridge itself. Sydney's legs nearly buckled. She had never heard her name spoken like that. With pride, the council exchanged looks, their masks slipping into calculation. Finally, the leader lifted his hand. "Very well," he said slowly. "The council recognizes Sydney Redwood as the rightful mate of Flynn Fisher, Alpha of Ravenclaw. The matter of Silverfang's succession will be addressed separately." The gavel struck. The judgment was sealed. Flynn exhaled deeply, his hand squeezing hers, and bent close to whisper against her ear. "It's done. You're mine, officially. No one will ever take you from me again." Her breath trembled. Did he just... "Yes," Flynn murmured, his voice rough, his wolf satisfied. "You're my Luna. The celebration of Ravenclaw." That night, Ravenclaw estate glittered like a palace. The gardens were strung with golden lanterns, chandeliers were hung even from the trees, and a string quartet played beneath the stars. Long tables overflowed with roasted venison, glazed pheasant, fresh bread, sugared fruits, and imported champagne flown in from Paris. Staff in designer suits moved like shadows, carrying trays of crystal flutes and silver platters. The pack filled the grounds, dressed in their finest, men in Armani and Gucci, women in gowns from Dior and Valentino, their laughter and voices blending into music. When Flynn and Sydney descended the grand marble staircase, the pack erupted in cheers. "Luna of Ravenclaw!" they cried, voices booming against the estate walls. "Luna! Luna!" Sydney's breath caught. She had never seen anything like it. The people she once feared, who once whispered about her as an outsider, now chanted her name. Her cheeks flushed as she stood beside Flynn, his arm anchored around her waist. Ariana swept forward first, her silk gown glimmering as she embraced Sydney fiercely. "You're family now," she whispered against her ear. "Not by blood, not by paper, but by bond. And I'll protect you as if you were my own sister." Lucien followed, towering in his black tuxedo, a rare softness in his eyes as he laid a heavy hand on Sydney's shoulder. "You survived what would have broken most wolves. You stood against betrayal and death, and you live. You'll be a fine Luna." Tears burned Sydney's eyes. For the first time, they weren't from pain, but from belonging. Flynn leaned close, his lips brushing her temple. "Do you hear them?" he murmured, his voice rough, meant only for her. "They're chanting for you. My Luna." Her heart swelled, the bond between them pulsing like a flame that would never die. She whispered back, her lips brushing his jaw. "Our family." His blue eyes glowed with something both fierce and tender, his wolf purring deep within him at her words. Flynn pulled her into his arms as the music swelled, their bodies moving together under the soft glow of lantern light. The estate roared with celebration, but for Sydney it was only him, the man who had saved her, fought for her, claimed her. She was no longer the broken bride left behind. She was no longer an outsider with no name. She was Sydney Redwood, Sydney Ravenclaw, Luna of Ravenclaw, and nothing, No family, no council, no law would ever take that from her again. Chapter 17. Ghosts of the Past. Morning shadows. The morning air was gray, the kind of muted light that felt like the world was holding its breath. From the balcony of her new chambers, Sydney stood barefoot against the cool marble, wrapped in a silk robe the color of midnight. The Ravenclaw crest shimmered at the hem, a reminder of who she was now, Luna of the Ridge's most powerful house. Beyond the gardens, she could hear the sounds of training, the echo of fists against leather, the grunt of exertion, the thunder of feet against earth. Flynn's commanding voice carried across the courtyard, low and sharp as he barked drills to his warriors. Normally that sound grounded her, his presence, even when distant, wrapped around her like a shield. But this morning, Sydney's thoughts were not on drills, or on Ravenclaw. They were on ghosts, the Smiths. No matter how tightly she wrapped herself in her new life, no matter how steady Flynn's hand felt in hers, she couldn't shake the echo of the people who had once called themselves her family. Christopher's cold rejection, Celine's poisoned smile, Kylie's betrayal. The council had stripped them of wealth, stripped them of titles. Elias had stripped them even of the Silverfang name they clung to so desperately. Their estate now stood abandoned, seized by the Ridge, and yet Sydney could not silence the whisper in her chest. They raised you, they fed you, they clothed you. They were once your home. It didn't matter that they had abandoned her when it counted most. It didn't matter that their hands had pushed her closer to death than life. The ache remained. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Sydney knew what she needed to do. She needed to face them. The prison of Lichen Ridge? The prison lay on the outskirts of the city, a fortress of cold steel and concrete, half buried in the earth like a scar. It was nothing like the opulent estates Sydney had grown accustomed to. Barbed wire glittered under the pale light, watchtowers loomed with armed guards, and the scent of rust and damp stone hung heavy in the air. Flynn's black Maybach slid to a halt at the gates, the Ravenclaw crest gleaming on its hood like a warning. Guards stiffened immediately, their eyes darting between the car and the man inside it. No one questioned Flynn Ravenclaw when he arrived anywhere, not even here. The gates clanged open after their papers were checked. Flynn's hand rested over Sydney's, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. His voice was low, edged with warning. You don't owe them anything. Her gaze stayed fixed on the looming gates. I know. Then why go? His tone carried more frustration than curiosity. Finally, she turned her face to his. Her eyes were soft, but there was steel beneath them now. Because I need to. Not for them, for me. For a moment, his jaw worked, silver eyes narrowing as though weighing whether to refuse her outright. But then he sighed, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. 1 hour, that's all. The car rolled forward, swallowed by shadows. The meeting, the visiting room was painted in lifeless gray. No windows, only a buzzing fluorescent light overhead, and a steel table with 2 chairs. Even the air smelled sterile, bleach and despair. The guards brought them in one by one, shackled at the wrists. Christopher entered first. Once, he had been a man of posture and pride, his presence sharp enough to command attention in any ballroom. But disgrace had carved lines into his face, bent his shoulders, and streaked his hair with gray. He sat without looking at her, his jaw clenched tight as though silence could shield him. Celine followed. Her beauty had dimmed, not from age, but from exhaustion. Her gown was prison gray, her nails bare, her eyes swollen from nights of tears. The mask she once wore at society galas was gone. What sat before Sydney now was a woman broken, clinging to fragments of a life lost. And then came Kylie. Chains rattled as she strode in, but her presence filled the room like a storm. Her dark hair was wild, her once perfect skin bruised and hollowed, but her eyes still burned. They locked onto Sydney with venom, daring, defiant, unbroken. For a long moment silence reigned. The weight of everything unsaid pressed down harder than the steel walls. Finally, Sydney broke it. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled against the table. "I came here today to tell you something. I don't hate you." Christopher flinched, the first crack in his mask. His gaze remained on the floor, but his fingers twitched, betraying the shame in his bones. Celine's lips parted, her chest heaving. Tears welled instantly. "Sydney, I don't hate you," Sydney repeated, her voice firmer now, "even after everything. After being cast aside. After betrayal. I don't hate you, because hating you would mean carrying you with me forever, and I won't do that anymore." Christopher's eyes finally flickered to hers, gray and hollow. His lips parted, but no words came. Celine leaned forward, chains rattling, her voice cracking. "We were wrong. I was wrong. We should have never— Oh, Sydney, my sweet girl, Stop!" Sydney's voice cut clean, quiet but sharp as a blade. The room stilled. "You were never my mother. And he," she turned to Christopher, her gaze unwavering, "was never my father. I found the truth. The Redwoods. My real family." Celine's face crumpled. No, you're ours. You were mine. No." Sydney's tears shimmered but didn't fall. "You raised me, yes. But I was never yours. You made sure of that every time you reminded me I wasn't enough. Every time you looked at Kylie as if she was all you ever wanted." At her name, Kylie leaned forward with a twisted smile, her voice dripping venom. "There it is. The little orphan's pity speech. Do you think that crown on your head makes you better than me? Do you think being Flynn's Luna makes you something? You stole it, Sydney. You stole everything. I stole nothing." Sydney's voice was calm, her back straight. "You gave it away the moment you betrayed me." Kylie slammed her chained fists against the steel, the clang reverberating like thunder. "It was supposed to be mine," she shrieked. "Elias was mine, the Silverfang seat was mine, the life, the power. It was all supposed to be mine. You were nothing. Nothing. And yet you—" her voice cracked into a raw snarl. "You ruined everything." Guards moved, ready to intervene, but Sydney lifted a hand. "Let her speak." Kylie's breath heaved, her face twisted with rage. "Mark my words, sister. You may have won today, but one day someone will take from you the way you took from me. And when that day comes, I'll laugh." The silence that followed was heavy, dangerous. Sydney stood slowly, her chair scraping back against the cold floor. Her chest trembled, but her voice did not. "I forgive you," she said. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do, and I won't carry you with me anymore." Kylie froze, her face twisting in disbelief. Christopher's head dropped into his hands. Celine sobbed openly, broken sounds echoing against the steel walls. Sydney turned, her steps measured, unflinching. The guards moved to escort the Smiths back to their cells. She didn't look back. Not once. Chapter 18. Kylie's Last Betrayal. The room had been quiet after Sydney's words of forgiveness. The guards had already begun to move the Smiths back to their cells, heavy boots echoing across the concrete floor. Chains rattled with each step, the sound harsh and final. Celine was still weeping, her mascara-stained cheeks blotched, clinging to the faint dignity of a woman who once threw soirees draped in Versace gowns. Christopher shuffled like a broken man, the sharp cologne that once defined his presence replaced by the stench of stale sweat and prison iron. Kylie, however, had been silent, too silent. Her chin had been lifted high, hatred simmering beneath her delicate features. The shackles jingled faintly with each twitch of her wrist, but no one seemed to notice. Not until Sydney turned away, not until the faintest click of something metallic cut through the silence. Her instincts froze her mid-step. Then, chaos, the lunge, a blur of motion. Kylie exploded forward with a feral snarl, her movements sharpened by weeks of rehearsed hatred. Somehow, impossibly, she slipped a thin blade from beneath the folds of her prison-issued sleeve. Smuggled, hidden, kept for this very moment. "Die, you thief!" she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. The blade caught the sterile fluorescent light, glinting wickedly as it slashed toward Sydney's chest. Sydney's body froze, a sharp gasp escaping her lips, the world narrowing to a single flash of silver arcing closer and closer. Her feet wouldn't move. Her heart slammed in her throat, but another body moved faster. A thunderous snarl shook the air. Flynn. He was a storm breaking through the steel door, a blur of tailored black, his custom Armani suit stretching over muscle as he slammed into the room with terrifying speed. One moment Sydney was exposed. The next she was yanked back behind the shield of his body. His hand shot out, catching Kylie's wrist with bone-crushing force. The knife halted, trembling an inch from Sydney's heart. Flynn's wolf simmered so close to the surface his voice was almost inhuman when it broke through clenched teeth. "You dare touch her, the fury of an alpha!" Kylie shrieked, twisting like a wildcat, but Flynn's grip was unyielding. With a sharp crack, the blade clattered to the floor, spinning across the cold concrete. Flynn slammed her down onto the steel table so hard the legs screeched against the floor, the sound scraping through the room like nails on glass. "You ungrateful wretch!" Flynn snarled, his voice reverberating like thunder. The glow in his silver eyes burned hotter, his wolf snarling beneath his skin. "You think prison bars protect you from me? From justice?" Kylie thrashed, spitting, her face twisting with venom. Her shackles rattled as she screamed, "She stole everything! She was nothing, and you all chose her over me! She deserves to die!" The guards froze, hands hovering near their weapons, but no one dared intervene. The sheer force of Flynn's presence pressed down on the room, suffocating, violent. With terrifying ease, Flynn yanked Kylie up by the collar, her feet dangling off the floor. Her designer past, the silk gowns, the Louboutin heels, the glittering jewelry, were gone. Now she was just a prisoner, a shell of rage in an orange jumpsuit. Flynn's voice dropped, low and lethal, a hiss that dripped venom. "You'll never touch her again. If I had my way, your blood would already stain this floor." His hand shifted to her throat, his fingers tightening around her pale neck. Kylie's face flushed, her eyes bulging, gasping desperately as her nails clawed at his wrist. "Please don't kill our baby," Celine said, already on her knees begging Flynn. The entire room trembled on the edge of violence. Sydney's voice. Flynn. The voice was soft, gentle, but it cut through his fury like a blade. His head snapped toward her. Sydney stood just a few feet away, her chest rising and falling, her hands trembling slightly but her gaze unflinching. Her voice, though quiet, carried enough weight to steady him. "Flynn," she repeated, stepping closer. "Stop. This isn't the way." His wolf howled inside him, demanding retribution, demanding blood. But Sydney's eyes, wide, steady, filled with something that pierced through rage, anchored him. "She's not worth it," Sydney whispered. "Don't let her take more from us than she already has." For a long moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Flynn's jaw clenched, his chest heaving like a storm barely restrained. Then, with a guttural growl, he dropped Kylie. She crumpled to the floor, hacking for air, hatred blazing in her eyes even in weakness as Celine grabbed her, hugging and kissing her forehead. Sydney smirked, looking at them pathetically. The final divide. Sydney crouched slightly, her fingers brushing the blade from the floor. Its weight felt cold, final, as she stood and handed it to the nearest guard without ever breaking eye contact with Kylie. Her voice was soft, raw, but steady. "No matter what I've done, no matter what I've said, I wanted to believe there was still a part of you I could reach. That maybe, one day, you'd look at me and see a sister instead of an enemy." Kylie's lips twisted into a sneer, her voice hoarse but venomous. "You'll never be my sister, you never were." The words sliced through Sydney, sharp and cruel. Yet, instead of breaking, she straightened her shoulders. Her Dior silk blouse, her tailored slacks, her polished poise. Everything about her screamed Luna now, not the castaway child they once mocked. "Then this is where it ends," Sydney said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'll stop hoping. I'll stop carrying you in my heart. You've made your choice, Kylie, and I've made mine." The guards hauled Kylie to her feet. She thrashed violently, screaming obscenities, spitting Sydney's name like it was poison. "Traitor! Cursed orphan! You'll fall! Mark my words, you'll fall!" Her screams echoed down the corridor as they dragged her away, each word dripping with venom, each syllable clanging like iron chains against Sydney's heart. But Sydney didn't flinch. Aftermath. The silence left behind was deafening. Sydney stood frozen, her breath shallow, her hands trembling from the near brush with death. The cold weight of adrenaline hummed through her veins. She hadn't realized how close she had been to dying, not until she saw Flynn's expression. He was on her in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. His embrace was fierce, desperate, almost crushing. "I almost lost you," he muttered against her hair, his voice hoarse. 1 second later, and His words broke apart, raw with fear. "I can't. Sydney, I can't lose you." Her hands curled into the fabric of his jacket, her forehead pressed against his chest, the steady pound of his heartbeat grounding her. "But you didn't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You saved me." He pulled back just enough to frame her face, his silver eyes burning with a mix of fury and tenderness. "If she had cut you, if I'd been too late..." He shook his head, his voice nearly breaking. "You're my world, I can't..." "You won't," Sydney said firmly, though her voice trembled. She cupped his jaw, steadying him. "Not now. Not ever." His forehead pressed to hers, his grip possessive and unyielding, as though by holding her tight enough, he could erase the terror of the last few minutes. Walking away. When they finally stepped out of the prison, the evening sun hung low, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. The iron gates clanged shut behind them, their shadows stretching across the cracked pavement. Flynn walked at her side, his hand clasping hers tightly, unwilling to let go. Sydney's steps were steady, though her heart carried a weight that no sunlight could erase. Some bonds could be healed, some wounds might scar over with time, but others, like hers with Kylie, were too poisoned, too jagged, too broken. For months, Sydney had carried the hope that her sister might change, that beneath the jealousy and venom there was still love. But today had proved what her heart had long feared. Some bonds must be buried so the heart can survive. She lifted her chin as the luxury car waited at the curbside, its polished black exterior gleaming in the fading sun. Flynn opened the door for her, his touch steady, his gaze unyielding. Sydney slid inside, her Dior heels clicking softly against the floor mat, and she didn't look back. Chapter 19. A future written in blood. The Ravenclaw estate had always loomed like a fortress. Its tall black stone walls seemed built to keep out the world, its sprawling marble halls echoing with the weight of legacy and blood. Every corridor whispered of power. Every polished chandelier reflected not just wealth but dominance. To outsiders, the mansion was cold, intimidating, but tonight, under Sydney's quiet gaze, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like home. She sat curled in the window seat of Flynn's study, the grandest room in the house apart from the throne hall itself. The shelves rose floor to ceiling, lined with first editions and leather tomes embossed with a Ravenclaw crest. Heavy velvet curtains framed the tall windows, though she had drawn them open to let the night breathe in. In her hand, a crystal glass of Bordeaux rested, untouched. Its deep ruby color caught the flicker of candlelight but did nothing to soothe the restless hum in her chest. Below, the estate gardens glowed in golden lantern light. Long banquet tables stretched across the courtyard, laid with silver trays of roasted meats, imported wines, delicate pastries, luxuries sourced from all corners of Lichen Ridge. Pack members sat together in laughter, dining beneath the stars. Children darted between tables, their laughter ringing clear. Musicians played softly, blending strings and drums into something both regal and wild. For the first time since she had been carried through these gates, bleeding, broken, and terrified, Sydney felt steady. Not like an orphan, not like an unwanted sister, not like prey, but like someone who finally belonged. Dreams of tomorrow. Flynn entered quietly, the door closing with a soft click. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. His tailored jacket, black Armani with silver thread embroidery at the cuffs, slid effortlessly from his shoulders as he draped it across the armchair. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he came to stand behind her, tall and broad, his hands resting on her shoulders with a possessive familiarity that steadied her more than the wine ever could. His reflection in the glass appeared as a shadow standing over her, not threatening, but protective. "They're finally beginning to heal," he murmured, watching the celebration below. His tone was soft, yet it carried the weight of an alpha observing his people. "You've done that, Sydney." She tilted her head back against him, the corners of her lips curving faintly. Her hair brushed against his jaw, her voice quiet but firm. "No. We did that. Together." His fingers traced down her arms, leaving a trail of warmth through the silk of her Dior blouse. The touch was both protective and possessive, yet tender in ways only she ever saw from him. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked. She blinked, her eyes reflecting the lantern-lit garden below. "About what?" "Our future." His voice was steady, but his eyes in the reflection betrayed something rarer. Uncertainty. "You and I, leading Ravenclaw not just through survival, but through something greater. No fractured lines, no endless blood feuds, just strength. Unity." Sydney set down her glass carefully, the crystal chiming softly against the marble windowsill. She turned to face him fully. His silver eyes caught the candlelight, fierce as always, but vulnerable too, a vulnerability reserved for her alone. "I think about it every day," she admitted. Her voice softened, but her words carried weight. "But I don't want our future defined by betrayal. I don't want it written in scars. I want it written in what we build together. In love, in loyalty, in us." Flynn's sharp features softened as he brushed his thumb along her cheekbone. His smile, rare and fleeting, appeared like the first break of sunlight after storm clouds. "Then we'll carve that future," he said. "In stone, in blood if we must. The letter—" The moment broke with a sharp knock. Lucien entered, his expression unreadable, his movements precise as always. He held a sealed envelope in gloved hands, placing it carefully into Sydney's lap as though it carried weight beyond parchment. The wax was crimson, pressed with the mark of a towering tree whose roots spiraled into intricate knots. Sydney's heart stumbled in her chest. She knew that emblem, the redwood seal, her true family's crest. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was heavy cream parchment, the ink thick, the handwriting elegant but forceful. To Sydney, daughter of Maya Redwood. Your path has brought you far from us, yet it was always leading here. The blood in your veins was never Silverfang. It was Redwood. It was ours. The time has come for you to claim what was always meant to be yours. We have waited in silence, but no longer. We've been waiting for you, dearest daughter. There was no signature, only the crest, inked in blood red at the bottom. Sydney's chest tightened as though invisible hands squeezed the air from her lungs. Flynn plucked the letter gently from her grasp. His jaw tightened as his silver gaze scanned the words. When his eyes lifted, they burned with cautious fury. They're calling you, he said flatly. His tone carried no softness now. And they don't send invitations, not without intent, the weight of blood. A shadow fell over the doorway. Ariana stood there, her gown shimmering champagne silk, her face pale as her eyes caught sight of the crest. The Redwoods, Ariana whispered, voice carrying dread. One of the oldest houses in Lichen Ridge. They don't reach out to just anyone. Ever. I'm not anyone, Sydney said, her voice quiet but laced with steel. I'm their blood. The words hung heavy, settling over the room like a storm cloud. Flynn closed the letter slowly, the parchment crackling in his grip. And what if this is a trap? You've already bled for one family who betrayed you. I won't watch you walk into another's claws. Her eyes flashed, fire sparking where months ago only fear had lived. And what if it's not? What if this is where I finally belong? What if they have the answers? About my mother, about why the Smiths even had me? Flynn stepped closer, towering over her, his presence overwhelming like a tidal wave. His voice was low but commanding. You belong here, with me, with Ravenclaw. I do, Sydney whispered, her hand pressing against his chest, grounding him. But part of me belongs to them too, whether we want it or not. If I turn away now, I'll never know. And I'm tired of living with shadows. Ariana's warning. Ariana crossed the room, her movements elegant but her expression taut with unease. She took Sydney's hand, her grip warm, sisterly, protective. The Redwoods are not like the Smiths, Ariana warned. They hold power differently. They're respected, yes, feared even, but they're secretive. Their loyalty is to blood alone. If you step into their world, Sydney, you may find it's not what you hoped for. Sydney's throat tightened, but her gaze stayed steady. Then I'll decide for myself, but I can't keep running from pieces of me. Lucian finally spoke, his voice a deep rumble. The Redwood Mansion is guarded like a fortress. If they invited you, they'll expect you to come, and they'll be watching who you bring. His dark eyes shifted toward Flynn. It won't be just a meeting. It will be a test, a quiet resolve. Later that night, Sydney stood alone on the balcony. The gardens below had gone quiet, lanterns dimmed, laughter faded into silence. Only the faint whisper of wind stirred the leaves. The letter lay folded in her palm, heavy as stone. Flynn joined her, his presence immediate. He didn't speak at first. He simply slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her against his side. His warmth seeped into her bones, his scent grounding her in a way nothing else could. You're really going to go, he said finally. His voice was quiet, almost resigned. Yes, she whispered, I have to. His jaw clenched, but instead of argument, he pressed his lips to her temple, lingering as though memorizing her. Then I'll go with you, wherever this road leads, even into Redwood blood. Her throat tightened with emotion. Flynn, he shook his head, silencing her. Don't thank me, just promise me something. What? Promise me you won't let them take you from me. Not by law, not by blood, not by anything. She pressed her palm against his chest, over his heart, and met his silver eyes with fierce steadiness. I promise. When they finally retired, the study lay in silence. The letter remained on the desk, its crimson seal glinting faintly in candlelight. Outside, the estate was calm. The world seemed at peace, but inside Sydney's chest her blood thrummed, answering a call she could no longer ignore. For the first time, her future no longer felt chained to betrayal or pain. It felt like a path waiting to be carved, a path written in blood. And somewhere, in the deep forests beyond Lichen Ridge, the redwoods were waiting. If you enjoyed this audiobook, subscribe to my channel for the second part of this interesting audiobook. Join my channel by becoming a member and have early access to stories and second parts of books. Save the playlist for more upcoming audiobooks. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Check out new audiobooks in my channel. Do you think Sydney has a connection to Alpha Michael and Gabriel Redwood? Comment your answers in the comments section. Thanks for listening.